The X-ray glowed against the light box like a map of something ending. Two shadows in the lung tissue, darker than they had been 6 months ago, spreading like ink in water. Jack McCrae studied them the way he once studied terrain maps in Vietnam, methodically, accepting what they revealed, calculating what time remained. Dr. Harrison's office smelled of antiseptic and old coffee. The oncologist sat across the desk, 70-something himself, lines around his eyes suggesting he'd delivered this speech before and hated it every time. His fingers drummed once against the manila folder. The numbers came out clinical, detached. Stage 2B, aggressive progression. With treatment, chemo, radiation, the whole arsenal, 3 to 5 years maybe. Without it, 18 months if luck held. Could be less. Jack's hands rested on his knees, steady except for the tremor that lived in his fingers now, a souvenir from firefights that never quite left. The tremor wasn't fear, it was just the body remembering what the mind tried to forget. At 78, most men his age struggled with stairs. Jack had kept himself ranch fit through sheer stubbornness. Daily chores, horse riding, the physical work that refused to let age win easy. That depends on how fast it spreads. The doctor's answer held the hollow comfort of someone who knew medicine had limits. Jack McCrae had turned 78 3 weeks ago. He'd survived 2 tours in Vietnam as a Force Recon Marine, 30 years as a U.S. Marshal tracking men who'd rather kill than surrender. And 3 years of watching his wife Margaret, 20 years his junior, forget his name before Alzheimer's finally released her at the cruel age of 55. The cancer felt almost polite by comparison, giving him a timeline instead of an ambush. Outside the window, Cheyenne sprawled under March snow, the kind that came late and stayed stubborn. Jack stood, his left leg dragging slightly, shrapnel from 1969, a VC grenade that missed killing him by inches. He shook the doctor's hand. The offer of aggressive treatment hung between them, and Jack let it fall. Spending his last months vomiting in a hospital bed wasn't living. Margaret had done that, tubes and monitors turning her into something that wasn't her anymore. He wouldn't put Sarah through watching that twice. The drive back to the ranch took 90 minutes. Highway 287, cutting through land that looked like God had scraped it flat and forgotten to add anything but sage and distance. Jack's truck, a '98 Ford that had seen better decades, rattled over frozen ruts. He stopped once, pulling off where the road crested a rise, giving him a view of the Laramie Range sprawled purple against winter sky. The flask came out of the glove box, bourbon that burned going down, and he took one pull, then capped it. Margaret used to say he was the stubbornest man alive, refusing to bend even when bending made sense. He figured stubbornness would serve him in dying too. The voice in his head, the one that narrated moments when silence got too heavy, spoke up like an old friend. Funny thing about dying, you think you'll be scared, but mostly you're just calculating. How many sunrises left? How many times making Sarah breakfast? How many more chances to do something that matters? The ranch appeared as the road curved west, a collection of weathered buildings huddled against the wind. 60 acres of not much, but it was his, bought with pension money and the settlement from Margaret's death. The house stood 2 stories, logs chinked tight against Wyoming winters, smoke rising from the chimney where Sarah would have the fire going. The barn listed slightly, needing repairs he kept meaning to get to. Fences stretched toward the tree line, enclosing nothing valuable except space between himself and the world. Sarah was at the kitchen table when he came through the door, homework spread in front of her, pencil tapping against her notebook in that rhythm that meant she was thinking hard. 12 years old, blonde hair like Margaret's pulled back in a ponytail, eyes that blue that came from Jack's side. She'd grown up with an old father, classmates' dads were in their 30s, 40s. Hers had gray hair since she could remember, moved with the careful deliberation of someone whose body had been through wars. She'd never known him young, only knew the version that survived everything and kept going anyway. She looked up, and her face did something complicated, relief that he'd come home, fear of what he'd learned, and a hardness that no 12-year-old should carry. The question came out flat. How bad? Jack hung his coat on the peg, buying seconds. Lying to her had never worked. She'd been 9 when Margaret died, old enough to understand death wasn't something you came back from. Trying to soften truth now would be an insult. He sat across from her, the table scarred from years of meals and Margaret's habit of carving little designs in the wood when she got restless. Routine checkup didn't make it past his lips. Sarah's expression called him out before he finished the thought. The honesty came out quiet. 18 months. Maybe more. Maybe less. Sarah's pencil stopped tapping. Her hands flattened on the table, pressing down like she needed to hold on to something solid. Tears came, but she didn't let them fall, blinking hard, jaw set in a way that looked too much like him. Are you scared? Of dying? The answer surprised him with its truth. No, of leaving you? Every damn day. The conversation that followed felt too adult, too raw for a father and daughter over homework. But Sarah had stopped being just a kid somewhere between her mother forgetting who she was and the day they buried her. She promised she'd be okay, that he'd taught her everything, but Jack knew better. You couldn't teach someone to be ready for being alone at 12. Sarah's voice cracked when she said she'd stopped being a kid at 9. The words hit harder than the diagnosis, a confirmation that he'd failed to shield her from the kind of loss that aged you before your time. The phone shattered the moment, ringing loud in the kitchen stillness. Jack crossed to it, expecting a telemarketer or the feed store with an order ready. The voice on the other end came clipped, professional, tinged with urgency that made Jack's instincts sharpen. Marshall McCrae, dispatch from Cody. We've got a situation. Jack hadn't been Marshall McCrae for 3 years, but old titles stuck like calluses. He listened as the dispatcher explained, body found near Ten Sleep Creek, 2 miles from his property line. Male, Native American, multiple gunshot wounds, dead several days. Local deputy requested his help. Jack knew the land, knew how to read a crime scene, and despite retirement, people still called when things got complicated. 20 minutes later, Jack rode his horse toward the creek, Sarah's worried face watching from the porch until distance swallowed the house. The gelding, a bay named Copper, picked his way through snow that had drifted 3 feet deep in places. Trees thickened as they descended toward water, lodgepole pine and juniper casting shadows that seemed too dark for midday. Deputy Marsh waited by the body, a kid in his 20s with a uniform too clean and a face too pale. He'd covered the corpse with a tarp, but blood had soaked through in places, dark against blue plastic. Jack dismounted, his leg protesting the motion, and approached with the careful attention he'd learned in 30 years of walking up on death. The man under the tarp had been 30-something, Lakota or Cheyenne, dressed in civilian clothes, jeans, boots, a jacket that had good insulation. 4 bullet holes stitched his chest in a tight grouping, professional shooting, close range. No defensive wounds on his hands. He'd been taken by surprise or trusted the shooter. The wallet in his jacket held ID, Daniel Blackwater, age 34, FBI credentials that looked current. Jack's memory stirred. 6 months back, the Bureau had contacted him about a trafficking investigation, asking if he'd seen unusual activity in the region. He'd said no, but the agent's name stuck. Blackwater, working undercover, building a case. Deputy Marsh's voice shook when he mentioned there was more. 50 yards downstream, tracks, barefoot, woman size, blood trail too light for mortal injury, heading northeast, toward Jack's ranch. The calculation took seconds. Woman fleeing execution, running through snow without shoes, heading to the only lights visible from here. She'd been out here days, same timeline as the body. If she was still moving, still alive, she wouldn't last much longer in this cold. Jack didn't ask permission. He followed the tracks, reading the story they told. Stumbling gait, frequent stops, hands grabbing trees for support. Blood drops every 20 feet, not arterial spray, maybe a graze or cut. The desperation in those footprints felt like a physical thing, a woman running on nothing but the refusal to die. He found her collapsed against a cottonwood, snow piled around her legs, skin gone gray with hypothermia. She wore a dress, deer hide torn at the shoulder, and the shape of her body made Jack's breath catch, visibly pregnant, 5 months at least. The curve of her belly unmistakable, even through layers of desperate cold. Her eyes opened when he knelt, black pupils blown wide, consciousness barely hanging on. The words bubbled out through blue lips. Daniel. They killed Daniel. The files. He gave me files. Have to protect. Then she was gone. Not dead, but unconscious. Body surrendering to cold and exhaustion. Jack stripped off his coat, wrapped her, lifted her with a grunt that spoke to age and weakness spreading through him. She weighed almost nothing, all bones and terror. He got her across the saddle, mounted behind her, and turned Copper toward home. The deputy shouted something about protocol, about calling an ambulance. But Jack ignored him. The nearest hospital was 40 miles. This woman had maybe an hour before frostbite turned to gangrene, before hypothermia stopped her heart. His ranch was closer, warmer, and had enough field medicine supplies from his marshal days to stabilize someone until proper help arrived. Sarah met them at the porch, eyes wide but not panicked. She'd already pulled blankets from the closet, boiled water, laid out the first aid kit that could handle anything from bullet wounds to snake bites. At 9, she'd helped her mother through the worst of Alzheimer's. At 12, she knew crisis didn't pause for shock. Jack carried the woman inside, laid her near the fire. Her skin felt like marble, cold enough to hurt his hands. Checking vitals, weak pulse, shallow breathing, fingers and toes showing early frostbite. But the baby's heartbeat, found with the old stethoscope from his medic training, came strong and steady, a small miracle against long odds. Sarah brought hot broth, blankets warmed by the fire, everything moving with the efficiency of someone who'd learned disasters required action over fear. Jack peeled off the woman's wet dress, noting the bruises on her shoulders, finger marks, someone had grabbed her hard, and the shallow cut along her ribs, recently clotted, source of the blood trail. The woman's eyes fluttered open as warmth started to seep back. Confusion, then terror, then recognition when she focused on Jack. The name came out as a rasp. McCrae? Daniel mentioned you. He said, if anything happened, find Jack McCrae. Jack's world tilted slightly. Daniel Blackwater had been FBI undercover, and somehow he'd told this woman, his wife probably, given the wedding ring, that Jack was safe harbor. The weight of that trust settled heavy. He kept his voice even, non-threatening. You're safe, I'm Jack McCrae. Retired marshal. Your husband trained under me 15 years back. Memory flooded in. Daniel, fresh out of Quantico, assigned to the Denver office, riding with Jack for 6 months learning how to track fugitives across the Rockies. Good kid, smart, patient, the kind who listened before he spoke. Jack had heard he'd gone undercover with trafficking rings. Dangerous work that required becoming someone else for years at a stretch. The woman's hand moved to her belly, protective instinct overriding everything else. Her story came in fragments. Her name was Nina Blackwater. She and Daniel had been married 2 years, pregnant 5 months. Daniel was building a case, massive trafficking operation, 11 states, hundreds of victims. 2 weeks ago, his cover broke. They came at dawn. Daniel fought, killed one, but there were too many. He told her to run. Jack listened without interrupting, noting details. 5 attackers, professional, coordinated, execution-style killing. Nina's voice cracked when she described Daniel's last words, telling her to take it and run, that it was worth more than their lives. The eye turned out to be a small device, surgically implanted through emergency procedure, sitting next to the baby in Nina's womb. Encrypted drive containing every file Daniel had compiled. Names, routes, money trails, victim testimonies. Evidence that could dismantle an entire network. Sarah, listening from the doorway, understood immediately. They'd kill her for it, kill the baby. The practical part of Jack's mind calculated threat levels, response times, defensive positions. The human part looked at a pregnant woman who just watched her husband murdered and knew walking away wasn't an option. Daniel had trusted him. That meant something. Maybe the last thing that would mean something before cancer took him. His voice came out flat with certainty. Then we protect her. Nina's protest was immediate. She couldn't ask them to risk their lives. But Jack hadn't asked for permission. The decision was made the moment he'd found her half frozen against that tree. The deeper reason, unspoken, settled in his chest like a weight he'd been waiting to carry. This was the last mission. Cancer had given him a timeline. Here was a chance to spend it on something that mattered. One more innocent to protect. One more monster to face down. A way to go out doing what he'd always done, standing between the predator and the prey. Night fell hard and fast the way it did in Wyoming winter, temperature dropping 20 degrees in an hour. Jack moved through the house with the methodical precision of someone preparing for siege, checking rifles, counting ammunition, testing the sat phone's charge, marking fields of fire from every window. Nina rested on the couch, Sarah beside her with a book, reading aloud in a soft voice that seemed designed to make the world feel less dangerous. The scene struck Jack with its strange domesticity. His daughter, a traumatized widow, a ticking clock counting down to viral endemas, all wrapped in the illusion of safety provided by wood walls and a warm fire. In his study, Jack spread out the case files Nina had managed to carry, photos, handwritten notes, an organizational chart that showed the trafficking network structure. At the top, a name and face. Cole Mason, 35, former Army Ranger, dishonorably discharged, now running an operation that moved women like cargo across state lines. The photo showed a man with hard edges, a scar running down his neck from an IED blast. Eyes that held the particular emptiness of someone who'd seen too much and felt too little. Jack had arrested men with eyes like that. They didn't negotiate, didn't surrender, didn't stop until someone made them. Below Mason's photo, a notation in Daniel's handwriting. Personal vendetta against retired Marshal J. McCrae. Origin, Vietnam. Father killed in action, 1969. Believes McCrae responsible. The words hit like a punch. Jack's hand moved to the desk drawer, pulled out a box he hadn't opened in years. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, a photograph taken from a dead VC soldier's pocket 56 years ago. A woman, a baby boy, writing on the back in Vietnamese and broken English. Min's family. Jack had killed Nguyen Min in the jungle darkness, a split-second decision in an ambush that left 3 Marines dead and Jack's leg full of shrapnel. He'd searched the body afterward, protocol, and found the photo, carried it for 5 decades, a reminder that every trigger pull had a cost, that the man he'd shot in terror had been someone's husband, someone's father. Could that baby have grown up to be Cole Mason? The timeline fit. The vendetta made sense, the particular hatred that drove a man to build an empire of suffering just to fund the hunt for one retired marshal. Jack's hand started shaking, the tremor worsening until he had to put the photo down. The voice in his head, always present in quiet moments, turned philosophical. Funny how ghosts work. You think you've buried them, 50 years deep. Then they come back wearing new faces, carrying old grudges, ready to finish what war started. Sarah appeared in the doorway, reading his body language with the accuracy of someone who'd learned to monitor his moods for signs of decline. She asked if he was okay, and the lie almost made it to his lips before honesty overrode it. The truth came out simple and devastating. The man hunting Nina wasn't just a criminal. He might be the son of a soldier Jack killed in Vietnam. A war that ended before Sarah was born had reached forward through decades to land on their doorstep, demanding payment for blood spilled in jungle darkness. Sarah crossed to him, put her hand on his shoulder with a weight that felt too mature, too understanding. The past wasn't his fault. He'd been 21 following orders, surviving. But Jack knew better. Orders didn't absolve you. Survival didn't erase the cost. He'd taken a father from a child, and now that child, grown into something terrible, was coming to take a father from Sarah. Symmetry so perfect, it felt like cosmic justice. The satellite phone's buzz cut through his spiral. Jack answered, and FBI Special Agent Tom Briggs' voice came through, professional concern barely masking alarm. Tom had been Jack's occasional partner back when interagency cooperation meant more than paperwork. They'd tracked a serial killer across 4 states in '98, spent 3 weeks in a motel planning raids and drinking bad coffee. Tom confirmed Daniel Blackwater's death, expressed condolences, then delivered the operational update. The Bureau was sending a team, ETA 36 hours, weather-grounded helicopters. Ground units were fastest option available. 36 hours felt like 36 years. Jack's assessment of Cole Mason suggested patience wasn't his style. If he knew Nina had escaped with the drive, knew she'd headed toward Jack's ranch, he'd move fast. Tom's voice took on a different weight when he added the detail that changed everything. Mason wasn't just a trafficker. He'd been hunting federal witnesses, 4 killed in the last year, each one taken out with precision that suggested military training and personal investment. Jack was the first target who'd survived initial contact more than 6 hours. The unspoken message was clear. Cole Mason was coming personally. This wasn't business. It was revenge wrapped in operational necessity, a chance to recover the drive and kill the man who'd destroyed his father in one efficient action. Jack thanked Tom, promised a hold position, ended the call. Through the window, the darkness pressed against glass, and somewhere in that darkness, a man who might be his biological son was planning his approach. The morning brought deceptive calm, sun turning snow into diamonds, sky so blue it hurt to look at. Jack stood on the porch, coffee steaming in the cold, watching the tree line for movement that didn't belong. His body felt heavier today, fatigue that went deeper than missed sleep, cancer announcing itself through bone-deep ache, and the cough that brought up spots of blood he wiped away before Sarah could see. Nana emerged, wrapped in one of Margaret's old coats, moving carefully, one hand on her belly. She'd regained color overnight, the hypothermia retreating, but trauma lived in her eyes. The particular 1,000-yard stare of someone who'd watched the worst thing happen and couldn't unsee it. They stood together, two people marked by violence, waiting for more to arrive. Nina asked the question that had probably kept her awake. Why was Jack helping her? He owed her nothing, risked everything, had his own daughter to protect. Jack's answer came after a long pull of coffee, words chosen carefully. Daniel trusted me, that's enough. But the fuller truth, the one he didn't speak, settled between them anyway. He was dying. Cancer had handed him a timeline. Here was a chance to spend it on something that mattered, protecting one more innocent, facing down one more monster, going out the way he'd lived, standing when others ran. Nina's response was quiet gratitude mixed with guilt, the weight of knowing her survival cost others their peace. But Jack had learned in Vietnam that guilt was just the price of living through what killed those beside you. You carried it, didn't let it paralyze you, and tried to make the cost worth paying. Sarah joined them, bringing breakfast, eggs, toast, bacon that she'd learned to cook the way Margaret used to, crispy edges and soft center. They ate on the porch despite the cold, a small act of defiance against the fear that wanted to keep them hiding inside. After breakfast, Jack began the work of preparation. He'd fortified positions before. Vietnam taught you how to turn vulnerable ground into something defensible. The ranch wasn't ideal, too much open space, limited choke points, but it had advantages. High ground toward the ridge, clear fields of fire, barn that could serve as secondary position, root cellar for last resort. Sarah helped without being asked, understanding the seriousness without needing it explained. She carried sandbags, moved furniture to create barricades, filled water containers in case fire became a weapon. Nina insisted on contributing despite her pregnancy, organizing medical supplies, preparing food that could sustain them through a siege, doing the quiet work that kept survival possible. Jack taught as he worked, explaining fields of fire, difference between cover and concealment, what to do if he went down. Sarah absorbed it with the grim attention of someone who understood the lesson might determine her life. When she asked if he'd killed before, the question came out, careful, probing. Yes. The answer was simple, unavoidable. Does it get easier? No, and pray it never does. The conversation moved into territory Jack had hoped to avoid, the moral weight of taking life, even in defense, even when necessary. He'd killed in Vietnam, killed as a marshal, and every face haunted him in quiet moments. The righteous ones, the clear self-defense, still left marks. Violence was never clean, never simple, never something you walked away from unchanged. Sarah deserved to know that. If this went bad, if she had to defend herself, she needed to understand the cost beforehand. Better to carry the weight prepared than have it crush you afterward. By afternoon, the ranch had transformed. Windows boarded with shooting ports left open, furniture rearranged to create defensive positions. Weapons staged at each location, rifles, pistols, ammunition counted and distributed. The root cellar stocked with supplies, escape tunnel Jack had dug years ago, paranoia from his Marshall days, cleaned out and verified. The work kept fear at bay, gave purpose to waiting. But as sun started its descent, painting snow orange and purple, tension ratcheted higher. Jack's instincts, honed by decades of hunting dangerous men, screamed warning. The stillness felt wrong. Too quiet. Too empty. He was proved right 90 minutes before dusk. The sound came first. Truck engine laboring through snow on the access road that dead-ended at Jack's property. Then silence. Engine cut about half a mile out, far enough to avoid immediate detection, close enough to approach on foot. Jack moved to the window, binoculars bringing the tree line into sharp focus. 3 figures emerged, moving with tactical precision, spacing themselves using terrain. Not amateurs. Not civilians who'd stumbled onto the property. Professional operators with mission focus. The calculation took seconds. He barked orders. Sarah and Nina to the root cellar. Now, no arguments. Sarah started to protest, wanting to help, but Jack's tone left no room for debate. Her job was staying alive. His was keeping them that way. But Sarah stopped at the cellar door, turned back, eyes meeting his with an understanding that hurt. She knew this might be the last time. The words that passed between them didn't need speaking. Love, fear, pride, goodbye, held in a look that lasted 3 seconds and contained a lifetime. Then she was gone, Nina's arm around her shoulders, disappearing to the earth. Jack returned to his position, Winchester rifle rested against sandbags, pistol on his hip, knife in his boot. The old gear felt comfortable, muscle memory from younger years when this kind of waiting had been routine. The 3 men approached in standard formation, 1 pointing, 2 flanking. They didn't rush, didn't try to hide. Arrogance or confidence, hard to tell the difference. At 50 yards, the point man called out, voice carrying across the snow. "Old man, we know you got the Indian woman. Send her out, we leave you alone." Jack's response was silence, letting the absence of answer be its own message. The point man tried again, patience wearing thin. "Have it your way." What happened next unfolded with the compressed violence of professional killing. The point man drew his pistol, aimed at Jack's window, but Jack had anticipated, was already firing, and his round took the man's center mass before the pistol cleared leather. The body dropped, dead before registering surprise. The other 2 scattered, automatic fire raking the house, wood splintering, glass exploding. Jack stayed low, repositioning to the back window where he'd predicted one would try to flank through the barn. The patience came from experience. Wait for the target to commit. Wait for clear shot. Don't waste ammunition on suppression. The flanker emerged exactly where Jack expected, torch in hand, planning to burn them out. Jack's shot at 75 yards was clean. Headshot, lights out, body crumpling into snow that started melting under the dropped torch. The 3rd man, wounded from Nina's earlier encounter according to the drag in his movement, tried crawling away. Jack stepped outside, rifle raised, moving with the careful approach of someone who'd survived this long by never assuming the fight was finished. The wounded man's pleas came out desperate, invoking family, begging mercy. Jack kept the rifle steady, asking questions that mattered. Who sent them? How many more were coming? Where was Cole Mason? The man laughed through pain, blood bubbling in his lungs. "Mason'll kill you, he knows who you are." The follow-up landed like a bomb. "Who am I?" "The man who killed his father." Vietnam, 1969. "You killed a VC named Nguyen Minh. Mason was his son. He's been looking for you for 30 years. Jack's world tilted, confirmation of what he'd suspected, horror of what it meant. The question he couldn't stop came out hoarse. "Mason, he's..." The man died before answering, last breath rattling out, leaving Jack standing over 3 corpses in snow turned pink with blood. Sarah and Nina emerged from the cellar, Sarah running to him, checking for wounds. He assured her he was fine, but the shake in his hands told a different story. Not fear, but the combination of adrenaline, cancer, and the revelation that the man hunting them might be connected to him by blood spilled decades ago. Nina surveyed the bodies with the flat affect of someone who'd seen too much death in too short a time. Jack noticed her hands moving automatically, checking for additional threats, angles of approach. She wasn't just a victim, she had training. Jack's attention shifted to the satellite phone one of the dead men carried. Incoming message lit the screen. Update? Jack typed response. Position compromised. He's better than expected. The reply came fast. Good. I want him to see it coming. CM. Jack showed Nina the message. She understood immediately. Cole Mason was coming himself. Wanted this personal. Wanted Jack aware and afraid. The tactical disadvantage of telegraphing intent didn't matter to someone driven by decades of hate. The sun finished setting, darkness swallowing the ranch except for the fire glow from windows. Jack stood outside, 3 bodies at his feet, staring at the ridge where he knew watchers waited. The voice in his head, constant companion, turned reflective. I thought I had 18 months. Turns out I might not have 18 hours. And somewhere out there, a man I've never met is coming to kill me. A man whose father I killed. A man who might be... No, can't think about that now. Sarah's voice called from the doorway, small and scared in a way she usually hid. Dad, get inside. We've got work to do. Jack took one last look at the darkness, at the future approaching with a knife in its teeth, then turned back toward the light. Sarah and Nina waited, faces pale but determined. They'd crossed a threshold. Blood had been spilled. The siege had begun. And somewhere in the dark, Cole Mason was coming home to settle accounts written in his father's blood. The bodies couldn't stay where they fell. Predators came at night, and 3 corpses would draw attention Jack couldn't afford. Coyotes? Maybe wolves. Definitely questions if anyone passed by. He dragged them one at a time to the barn, grunting with effort that had less to do with their weight and more to do with the exhaustion spreading through his limbs like wet concrete. Nina appeared beside him, halfway through the second body, grabbing the dead man's boots without asking permission. Jack started to protest. She was pregnant, traumatized. Shouldn't be handling corpses, but the look she gave him shut that down. Her hands moved with efficiency that spoke of experience, not just adrenaline. They worked in silence, breath fogging in the cold barn air, stacking the bodies behind hay bales where they'd freeze solid by morning. Jack pulled wallets, phones, anything that might provide intelligence. Driver's licenses from 3 different states, all fake. Burner phones with minimal call history. One carried military dog tags, scratched beyond reading, but suggesting background Jack had suspected. Sarah met them at the barn door, rifle slung over her shoulder in a way that made Jack's chest tighten. Too comfortable, too natural for a 12-year-old. She'd kept watch, scanning the tree line through the rifle scope, learning the rhythm of threat assessment without being taught. Her voice came out steady when she reported no additional movement, but her hands shook when she lowered the gun. Inside, the house smelled of gun smoke and fear sweat despite open windows. Jack moved through rooms with renewed focus, seeing weaknesses he'd missed in first preparation. The north window's firing angle was compromised by the propane tank. One lucky shot and they'd lose heat, maybe worse. The back door's barricade wouldn't hold against sustained assault. The safe room in the basement had only one entrance, making it a trap if enemies controlled the ground floor. He worked through the night, Nina and Sarah helping where they could, following instructions that came out clipped and military. Reinforced window frames with steel plating from the barn. Move ammunition caches to multiple locations. Set up fallback positions with clear retreat paths. Create noise traps, tin cans on wire, simple but effective in darkness. Sarah carried sandbags until her arms shook, never complaining, pushing through exhaustion with the same stubbornness Jack recognized from looking in mirrors. Nina organized supplies with tactical thinking that went beyond civilian logic. Food that didn't require cooking, water in manageable containers, medical gear staged at each defensive position. Around 3 a.m., Jack's cough doubled him over, harsh and wet, blood speckling his hand when he pulled it away. Nina saw, didn't comment, just handed him water and a rag. The look they exchanged held understanding. She knew he was dying, knew his time was measured in weeks, not months, knew this stand might be his last, regardless of who won. Dawn came reluctantly, gray light revealing a transformed space. The ranch house had become a fortress, crude but functional, every angle considered, every weakness addressed as much as possible. Jack stood in the center of the main room, turning slowly, memorizing sight lines and distances. This was where they'd make their stand. This was where Cole Mason would come. Sarah slumped against the wall, asleep sitting up, rifle across her lap. Nina sat nearby, hand on her belly, eyes distant. Jack watched them. Two people he'd known less than 24 hours, now bound to him by blood and circumstance. The weight of their survival pressed against his chest, heavier than the cancer. The voice in his head spoke up, philosophical in the pre-dawn quiet. Strange how family works. Not always the people you are born to. Sometimes it's the ones you choose to die for. Morning planning happened over coffee strong enough to strip paint. Jack spread maps across the table, marking Mason's most likely approaches, calculating response times, identifying choke points. Nina leaned in, asking questions that revealed military thinking. What about flanking from the creek bed? How many shooters could the barn concealment hold? Where were the blind spots in their coverage? Jack studied her with new assessment. Daniel's widow, yes. Pregnant and traumatized? Absolutely. But something else lived beneath that surface. His question came out direct. Where'd you learn tactics? Nina's pause stretched long enough to be significant. When the answer came, it rearranged Jack's understanding of the past 24 hours. She hadn't just been Daniel's wife. She'd been his partner. The trafficking investigation required someone inside, a native woman who could infiltrate, gain trust, pass information. Nina had volunteered. For 2 years, she'd played the role, getting close to Mason's operation, documenting routes and victims, feeding intelligence to Daniel while maintaining cover so deep even her own family thought she'd disappeared into the network. The pregnancy had been real, unplanned, a complication that made extraction necessary. Daniel had pulled her out 3 months ago, but Mason's paranoia had caught up. Someone had talked. The raid came at dawn, and Daniel had died buying Nina time to run with evidence that could dismantle everything Mason built. Jack listened without interrupting, recalculating threat assessment and ally capability. Nina wasn't a civilian to protect. She was an operator with field experience and motivation that went beyond survival. She'd watched her husband tortured for information he died refusing to give. The question that mattered came out quiet. Can you shoot? Nina's response was standing, walking to the gun cabinet, selecting the Winchester, checking the action with movements that spoke of familiarity. She didn't answer with words. The demonstration was enough. Sarah woke to find them planning like soldiers, her father and this stranger speaking in shorthand that excluded her. Jack saw the hurt flash across her face before she hid it, the fear of being pushed aside, treated like a child when she'd proven herself capable. He called her over, spread the map, included her in the discussion. If they came from the east, Sarah's position would be critical. High angle, clear field of fire, covering the approach Jack couldn't see from ground level. If they breached the main floor, her job was getting Nina to the safe room and holding that position. If Jack went down, she became primary defender until FBI arrived. The weight of that responsibility settled on Sarah's shoulders visibly, pressing down, aging her. But she nodded, accepting it because what else could she do? Childhood had ended when her mother forgot her name. This was just another lesson in surviving what tried to break you. Jack's hand found her shoulder, squeezed once. The gesture said what words couldn't. Pride, fear, love, apology for making her carry burdens too heavy for her years. Sarah's journal lay open on her bed, ink bleeding through pages from where she'd pressed too hard. Jack found it when searching her room for anything that could become a projectile if fighting moved upstairs. He shouldn't have read it. Privacy mattered, even in crisis. But the date on the open page stopped him. 3 months ago, 2 weeks after his diagnosis. The entry started with "Dear Mom," the way all Sarah's journal entries did, maintaining conversation with a woman who'd been gone 3 years. The words that followed hit harder than any bullet. She'd known about the cancer before he told her. Found his pill bottles, recognized the names from internet searches, understood what stage 2 meant. She'd been preparing to lose him since January, working through grief in private, being strong when he was watching because she thought that's what he needed. The handwriting got shakier toward the end. I'm not ready to lose him, Mom. I know you'd say I have to be strong, but I'm 12. How strong am I supposed to be? Jack's hands trembled, making the page blur. He'd been so careful, thought he'd hidden the evidence, protected her from knowledge that would hurt. But Sarah was smarter than he'd credited, more observant, carrying weight he'd tried to spare her from. The realization that she'd been alone in that knowledge, afraid to confront him, trying to be brave while watching him die, it broke something in Jack's chest that cancer hadn't managed to touch. He closed the journal carefully, replaced it exactly as found, and then walked downstairs with new understanding of his daughter's strength. She'd been protecting him the same way he protected her. Both of them carrying secrets to spare the other pain. The afternoon brought false alarm that nearly stopped Jack's heart. Gunshot from outside, single crack echoing off the ridge. Jack grabbed the rifle. Nina taking position at the window, Sarah running downstairs with her own weapon. The three of them moved like a unit, no wasted motion, each knowing their role. But the threat was just a coyote, bold enough to approach the chicken coop in daylight. Jack's shot had been pure reflex, dropping the animal before conscious thought caught up. The adrenaline dump left him shaking, coughing, tasting blood. Sarah lowered her rifle slowly, realization washing over her features. She'd been ready to kill someone. The weight of that readiness, the speed with which violence had become normalized, showed in how her hands couldn't quite steady. Jack approached, keeping his voice calm despite his own racing pulse. Good response time. Quick assessment. But check your target before committing to the shot. The teaching moment felt obscene, instructing his 12-year-old daughter in combat discipline, preparing her for killing, normalizing horror. But the alternative was her death, and that calculation simplified everything. They walked back to the house together, and something in Sarah's posture told Jack she needed to talk. The words came out in a rush. She'd found the journal entry he'd read. Not his fault. She'd left it open, almost like she wanted him to see. The relief in her voice when she admitted knowing about the cancer carried the weight of months keeping secrets. They'd been protecting each other, both pretending, both afraid to break the careful fiction. Jack's throat tightened, making words difficult. The truth came out rough. I'm sorry. I thought keeping it from you would make it easier. Sarah's response was simple. Nothing about this is easy. They sat on the porch steps, rifles within reach, watching the tree line and talked the way they should have months ago. Jack told her about Margaret's final days, the relief mixed with guilt when she'd finally let go, the fear of putting Sarah through that again. Sarah told him about nightmares where she lost him the same way, slowly, watching him disappear piece by piece. The conversation meandered into territory Jack had avoided. What would happen after? Sarah would go to Jack's brother in Montana, a decent man with a decent family. She'd finish school, have normal teenage years, build a life beyond this ranch and the violence it attracted. Sarah's face set in familiar stubbornness. I don't want normal. I want you. The simple statement carried impossible desire. Wanting to hold back death through force of will, Jack pulled her close, rare physical affection that both of them needed. His promise came out quiet but absolute. I'll be here as long as I can, and when I'm gone, I'll have made sure you are safe. Sarah pulled back, looking at him with eyes too old. How? By stopping Cole Mason, by making sure men like him can't hurt you ever again. The words hung in cold air, a vow that required his death to fulfill. Sarah understood. Jack saw it in how her face closed off, accepting what couldn't be changed. Evening brought Nina's full story, told in the kitchen over soup that none of them tasted. Jack had suspected she was more than traumatized widow, but the scope of her involvement redrew his tactical assessment completely. 2 years undercover. Getting recruited by Mason's network through a reservation contact, playing the desperate woman looking for work, willing to travel, asking no questions. Gaining trust slowly, carefully, until she had access to the operational core, safe houses, routes, buyer contacts, money flows. Daniel had been her handler, Their relationship professional until it wasn't. Love complicated missions, everyone knew that, but they'd made it work. The marriage was real, the baby was real. The mission continued around their stolen normalcy, both knowing it couldn't last. Mason's paranoia had finally caught up. A federal informant within his network had sold them out. Ironic, the same weapon Daniel wielded turned against them. The attack came without warning, overwhelming force, designed to capture and extract information through methods that made death seem merciful. Nina's voice went flat when she described Daniel's final moments. The torture had been methodical, professional. Mason asking questions he already knew the answers to, testing Daniel's breaking point. But Daniel had done something desperate and brilliant. Emergency surgery, implanting the encrypted drive next to their baby, telling Nina to run while he kept screaming to cover the sound. She'd heard him die while crawling through ventilation ducts. The memory lived in her eyes, haunting and fresh. Jack listened, understanding cascading into rage. Daniel Blackwater had been his student, the kid he'd trained to survive, and Mason had turned that survival training into prolonged suffering. The professional part of Jack's mind noted tactical details. The human part wanted Cole Mason dead. Nina's hand moved to her belly, protective gesture that had become constant. This baby is all I have left of him. Everything else, my cover, my people, my life before, it's gone. Just this. The weight of that loss, compressed into one unborn child, seemed impossible to carry. But Nina carried it anyway because what else could she do? Jack's respect for her deepened. Recognition between warriors who'd both lost everything except the mission. She wasn't liability. She was asset. And more than that, she was proof that courage didn't require youth or strength, just refusal to quit. The satellite phone's buzz shattered the moment. Jack answered, Tom Briggs's voice crackling through distance and atmospheric interference. The update was both relief and disappointment. FBI team en route, ETA 36 hours. Weather had cleared enough for ground transport, but helicopters still grounded. They were coming as fast as possible, but fast still meant a day and a half. Jack's gut said they didn't have 36 hours. Mason knew where they were, knew what they had, knew that every passing moment increased risk of federal intervention. He'd move soon. Tom's voice took on weight when he delivered the intelligence that changed Jack's threat assessment. Mason wasn't just a trafficker hunting escaped evidence. He'd been systematically eliminating federal witnesses, 4 in the past year, each kill bearing the signature of someone with professional training and personal investment. The unspoken subtext was clear. Mason enjoyed it. The revenge wasn't just business, it was vocation. Tom's final warning made Jack's chest tighten. You're the first target who survived initial contact more than 6 hours. He's probably confused, angry, coming himself to finish it. The call ended with promises of air support if weather cleared, backup from local law enforcement if Jack needed it sooner, all the institutional help that meant nothing when enemies were already at your door. Jack relayed the information to Nina and Sarah, watching their faces process the timeline. 36 hours might as well be 36 days if Mason moved tonight. The decision came easily. They'd hold position, make it costly, delay long enough for help to arrive. Standard siege defense, conserve ammunition, hold choke points, make attackers pay for every inch. Sarah's question cut through tactical planning. And if we can't hold? Jack's answer was honest. Then we make sure Nina gets out. Evidence gets to FBI, and we buy that time with whatever we have left. The math was simple and brutal. Jack was dying anyway. Sarah wouldn't leave him. Nina carried the mission. 1 life, maybe 2, for hundreds of victims freed. The calculation made cold sense. But Sarah's face showed she'd done different math, where her father dying was an acceptable price, where survival mattered more than mission success. The conflict between what needed doing and what her heart could accept played across her features. Jack wanted to comfort her, promised they'd all make it, but lies didn't serve anyone. The truth was they were 3 people against an army, buying time they might not have, hoping rescue arrived before annihilation. Noon came with deceptive peace. Sun painted snow in shades of gold and blue. the kind of beauty that made you forget the world held ugliness. Sarah was outside feeding horses, her chore routine providing normalcy in chaos, when Jack made the mistake of believing in that momentary calm. The explosion wasn't large, flashbang, designed to disorient, not destroy, but it was loud enough to make Jack and Nina sprint for the door, leaving windows unguarded for 30 seconds. 30 seconds was all it took. Jack reached the barn to find Sarah gone. Struggle marks in snow told the story. She'd fought, got dragged to a vehicle, forced inside. Tire tracks led east, recent and voix that exhaust still hung in air. The note was pinned to the fence with a hunting knife, paper fluttering in breeze that seemed to mock them. Jack's hands shook reading it, words blurring, world narrowing to single horrible truth. They had Sarah. Marshall McCrae, I have your daughter. She's alive, for now. You have something I want. The woman. Trade. The woman and the drive for your daughter. Red Creek Canyon, midnight. Come alone. Come armed. But come, or I'll send Sarah back in pieces. The postscript cut deeper than threats. Did you know my father carried a photo of me until the day you killed him? His dying thought was probably of his son. Now your dying thought will be of your daughter. Cole Mason. Jack's knees hit the ground before he felt them give. The note crumpled in his fist, rage and terror and guilt collapsing into something that looked like surrender. The cough that followed brought blood, body giving up, same moment spirit did. Nina caught him before he face-planted in snow, her arms surprising strength for someone 5 months pregnant. She was screaming his name, shaking him, but the words came through water, distorted and meaningless. All Jack could think was, this is my fault. Vietnam killed his father. Now he takes my daughter. I deserve this. But she doesn't. She doesn't. His fist kept hitting frozen ground, knuckles splitting, blood mixing with snow. The physical pain was relief, something concrete to focus on instead of the image of Sarah terrified in enemy hands. Nina's slap cracked across his face, sharp enough to penetrate the spiral. Her voice cut through his breakdown. Stop it! Sarah needs you! The Marine, the Marshal! Not this! Jack's eyes focused on her, vision clearing enough to see fury in her expression. She wasn't offering comfort. She was demanding he stand. Your daughter is alive. Fight for her. The words penetrated. Sarah was alive. Mason wanted leverage, theater, the pleasure of watching Jack squirm. That meant time. Not much, but some. Jack forced himself upright, each movement requiring conscious effort. The old training reasserted itself. Assess, adapt, execute. Breakdown was luxury he couldn't afford. His voice came out steadier than he felt. You're right. Nina wasn't done. Not alone, you're not. The argument was brief. Mason's note said, come alone, but that was an invitation to ambush, guarantee of all 3 deaths. Nina understood tactical reality better than to trust enemy promises. Her voice held steel when she laid out what Jack already knew. You think he'll let Sarah live even if you trade me? He'll kill all of us. Jack's mind cleared, cancer and terror receding before operational necessity. Red Creek Canyon. He knew it. High walls, single entrance, perfect kill zone. Mason had chosen well. But perfect ambush sites worked both ways if you got there first, if you had someone watching your back. The plan formed with brutal simplicity. Jack would go, appear to comply with demands. Nina would take sniper position outside, thermal scope giving her advantage in darkness. When Mason showed himself, they'd turn his ambush into theirs. Nina's pregnancy was obvious, undeniable complication. Jack had to say it. She was risking 2 lives. Her baby's survival wasn't guaranteed if this went wrong. Her response was looking at him with eyes that had watched her husband die, carrying weight that would have crushed weaker people. Sarah is 12. We're both doing this. The acceptance in her tone said the decision was made before words left her mouth. She'd already lost Daniel. Losing more was just arithmetic at this point. Jack wanted to argue, to protect, but looking at Nina, he saw truth he'd been avoiding. She wasn't victim to shelter. She was warrior who'd earned respect through blood and loss. Treating her as less was insult she didn't deserve. His nod was acknowledgement of equals entering battle. Then let's prepare. The next hours passed in focused intensity. Every weapon checked, cleaned, loaded. Jack strapped on vest, knife, pistol, rifle. Nina did same, movements professional despite the belly that made bending difficult. Jack recorded video on the camera he used for documenting property damage, legacy message, in case he didn't return. The words came out harder than expected. Sarah, if you see this, I didn't make it. But know I tried. Know I loved you more than life. Be strong, be good. Remember what I taught you. He stopped recording, throat too tight to continue. Nina's hand on his shoulder offered comfort without words. They loaded the truck as sun-painted horizon orange and purple. 2 hours to Red Creek Canyon. Mason had said midnight, 7 hours away. But arriving early was first rule of not getting killed in ambush. Control the ground, know the terrain, force enemy to come to you. Jack took one last look at the ranch. The house where Margaret had died, where Sarah had grown up, where 3 bodies cooled in the barn. This place had been sanctuary. Now it was just wood and memory. Nina climbed in passenger seat, rifle between her knees. Jack started the engine, and the truck pulled away, carrying them toward confrontation that would end with some people dead. The only question was which ones. The voice in his head spoke up as ranch disappeared in rearview mirror. Mason wanted the old warrior. He's about to get him. One last time. Whatever happens, Sarah walks away. That's all that matters. That's the only thing that's ever mattered. Distance swallowed the ranch. Night swallowed the distance. And somewhere ahead, in a canyon that had seen blood before, Cole Mason waited to finish what Vietnam started 54 years ago. Red Creek Canyon sat 23 miles northeast, accessed by logging roads that hadn't seen maintenance since the 90s. The truck's suspension groaned over ruts frozen solid, headlights cutting through darkness that pressed against the windshield like something physical. Jack drove with hands that had stopped shaking. Cancer fatigue and adrenaline canceling each other into a numb focus that made everything sharp-edged and unreal. Nina rode silent beside him, one hand braced against the dashboard, the other resting on the rifle between her knees. Her belly pressed against the seatbelt in a way that had to be uncomfortable, but she didn't adjust, didn't complain. The baby kicked. Jack saw the movement ripple across her coat, and Nina's expression flickered with something complex before going neutral again. They arrived 2 hours early, Jack killing the lights a mile out and coasting the final stretch on momentum alone. The canyon opened before them like a wound in the earth, walls rising 40 feet on either side, floor maybe 200 yards long and 50 wide. Creek ran down the center, frozen solid this time of year, reflecting starlight in jagged patterns. Jack scanned the terrain with the patience learned from setting up sniper hides in Vietnam. The north wall had an outcropping 200 yards from the canyon center, elevated 20 feet, perfect sightlines. That's where Nina would go. The south wall was too sheer, no cover, kill zone for anyone attempting it. East entrance was where Mason would expect Jack to arrive. West exit was blocked by rockfall from last year's spring melt, impassable to vehicles but not to someone desperate and small. The tactical assessment took 3 minutes. Jack pointed to the outcropping, and Nina nodded understanding before he spoke. Getting her into position took longer. Pregnant women and rock climbing weren't compatible, but Nina moved with the careful determination of someone who'd trained through worse. Jack followed below, ready to catch if she slipped, but her feet found holes he would have missed. The outcropping was narrow, barely room for prone shooting position, but the angle was perfect. Nina settled in, extending the rifle's bipod, checking the thermal scope that turned body heat into white ghosts against black background. She could see the entire canyon floor, had clear shot to anywhere Mason might position himself. Jack descended, leaving her water and ammunition, taking her hand once in a gesture that said more than words. She squeezed back, eyes already scanning approaches, professional focus overriding everything else. The wait began at 8 p.m., 4 hours until midnight. Jack positioned himself at the east entrance, visible, apparently alone, rifle slung to appear non-threatening. The performance required projecting compliance and fear. Mason needed to believe he'd won. Needed to savor victory before Nina's bullet removed his ability to savor anything. Cold settled deeper as hours passed, temperature dropping to single digits, breath fogging with each exhale. Jack's thoughts drifted to Sarah, imagining her scared, maybe hurt, definitely wondering if her father would come. The image of her tied up somewhere, Mason's men watching her with the casual cruelty of people who viewed children as leverage, made rage burn in his chest hot enough to forget the cold. The voice in his head, always present in quiet moments, spoke with unusual gentleness. She's strong, stronger than you were at 12. Whatever happens tonight, she'll survive it. Question is whether you'll be there to see what she becomes. Cancer guaranteed one answer. Tonight would determine the other. At 11:45, lights appeared on the access road. 3 vehicles approaching slow, headlights cutting through darkness like searchlights. Jack's pulse stayed steady, old training suppressing fear into something useful. Nina's voice crackled through the earpiece they'd rigged from old Marshall equipment. I count 6 heat signatures. 3 vehicles. Mason's in the center one. Jack clicked acknowledgement, watching the convoy stop 50 yards out. Doors open, men emerged, tactical gear and automatic weapons catching starlight. They moved with military precision, establishing perimeter, checking angles, doing exactly what Jack would do if positions were reversed. Then Cole Mason stepped into the open. The photo from Daniel's files hadn't captured the physical presence. 6'2", lean muscle, moving with the controlled grace of someone who'd trained violence into reflex. The scar from an IED blast ran down his neck, disappearing under his collar, a reminder of wars that never quite ended. But it was the eyes that stopped Jack cold. Pale gray, same shade as his own, same intensity that Margaret used to say could cut glass. Mason walked forward alone, stopping 20 yards from the canyon entrance. His voice carried across the distance, flat affects suggesting either complete control or complete disconnection from feeling. Marshall McCrae. Finally. Jack stood, hands visible, rifle slung. His voice came out rougher than intended, throat tight with the effort of not screaming about Sarah. Where's my daughter? Mason's gesture brought 2 men forward, pushing a small figure ahead of them. Sarah stumbled into the light, hands zip-tied behind her back, tape across her mouth, but eyes blazing with fury instead of fear. She saw Jack and tried to run, but the men held her back. Relief and rage fought for dominance in Jack's chest. Sarah was alive, appeared unharmed beyond restraints. The calculation shifted. She could still walk away from this. Mason's smile held no warmth. She's got spirit, reminds me of someone. The implication hung there, unspoken but clear. Jack forced himself to focus on immediate need. Let her go, I'm here. Mason's laugh was brief, unpleasant. You really came alone? That stupid or that desperate? Both. The honesty seemed to surprise Mason, who studied Jack with renewed interest. The moment stretched, 2 men sizing each other across ground that would soon turn violent. Then Mason moved closer, crossing into the canyon proper, leaving his men at the entrance. The tactical error was obvious. He wanted this personal, wanted to see Jack's face when breaking him. Jack stepped forward to meet him, and they stood 10 yards apart, breath fogging between them. Mason's eyes tracked over Jack's features with intensity that felt invasive, searching for something specific. Do you remember my father? Yes. The answer came simple, unavoidable. Tell me his name. Nguyen Min. Jack's pronunciation was decent, learned from carrying that photo for 20 years, practicing syllables in case he ever needed to speak them. Mason's face showed surprise, then something harder. You remember? Jack pulled the photo from his pocket, same one he'd carried since 1969, edges worn soft from handling. He held it out, and Mason took it with hands that trembled slightly. First sign of emotion breaking through the professional calm. The image showed a woman and baby, writing on back in Vietnamese and English. Mason stared at it like it might vanish, fingers tracing the woman's face with reverence that spoke of loss so old it had calcified into identity. Why? Mason's voice cracked. Why carry this? Because I needed to remember what war costs. Jack's throat felt raw. I was 21, scared. Your father came at me. I shot him. I didn't know he was protecting his family. I just knew he had a gun. The pause that followed held weight of decades. 2 men standing in frozen canyon, processing sins and consequences that predated both their adult lives. I'm sorry. It doesn't change anything. But I'm sorry. Mason's rage erupted sudden and total. Sorry? Sorry? You murdered my father. I grew up without him. My mother died of grief. I was raised by strangers. And you carried his photo? The words echoed off canyon walls, and Jack understood the depth of Mason's hatred. The way it had shaped everything, turned a boy's loss into a man's crusade. Your father was a soldier. Like me, he deserved to be remembered. Mason's bitter laugh carried genuine pain beneath mockery. You want to know the funny part? He pulled a locket from his neck, opened it, held it toward Jack. The image inside stopped Jack's breath. Young Vietnamese woman, baby, an American soldier. The soldier was him, younger, 21, in village before the war intensified. Memory flooded back unwanted. Village visit, pretty translator who'd smiled at him, shared meal, conversation that made war feel distant for 3 hours. Then reassignment, moving north, never seeing her again. Mason's voice cut through the memory. My mother was working as translator. Met you briefly, 1968. After you left, she married Min. He raised me as his. The pieces assembled into picture Jack didn't want to see. The timeline fit. The woman's features, glimpsed in Mason's bone structure. The eyes that matched his own. But my mother told me before she died. My real father was an American Marine, Jack McCrae. The canyon tilted, stars spinning, ground unsteady beneath Jack's feet. The truth landed with the weight of mountains. Cole Mason was his son. Biological son. Son he'd never known existed, raised by a man Jack had killed, turned into monster by grief Jack had caused. The revelation was so perfect in its cruelty that Jack almost laughed. Cosmic justice so complete it felt scripted. You're my father, and you killed the only dad I ever knew. Jack couldn't speak, couldn't think, staring at his son who wanted him dead, at the proof that his one night of tenderness in a war zone had created life that became devoted to death. Sarah's muffled scream cut through his paralysis. She'd heard, struggled against her captors with renewed desperation. The revelation that her father had another child, that the man trying to kill them was her half-brother, showed in her eyes even through the tape. Mason's voice turned to his men. Bring the woman, the pregnant one. She's here somewhere. Jack started to deny it, but Mason cut him off. Don't lie to me, Dad. The word dripped venom and longing mixed into something toxic. Nina's voice crackled in Jack's ear, too quiet for anyone else to hear. I can take him now, clean shot. Jack clicked negative. 2 clicks meant hold position. They needed Mason to commit further, needed his men in the canyon, needed the tactical advantage of confined space. Mason's patience ran out. He pulled his pistol, aimed it at Sarah's head. You have 10 seconds to produce Nina Blackwater, or I blow your daughter's brains across this canyon. The count began, and Jack's world narrowed to impossible choice. Sacrifice Nina and her baby, or watch Sarah die. Both options were unacceptable. Both required living with weight that would make cancer seem merciful. At 5, Nina made the choice for him. Her voice rang out from the outcropping, strong despite circumstances. Mason Vance, I'm here to trade. Every head snapped toward the sound. Nina stood on the ledge, rifle aimed down, thermal scope giving her advantage they couldn't match. Mason's face split into something resembling smile. Well, the widow Winter. Where's Ethan? The name confusion, calling Jack Ethan, registered as meaningless detail in larger chaos. Nina's response came loud and clear. He's not coming, too broken. Sent me instead. Mason's skepticism was immediate. You expect me to believe that? Ethan Cole would never send a woman to do his job. Jack's confusion deepened. Ethan Cole, not Jack McCrae. Nina was playing role, but the name substitution suggested intelligence Jack didn't have. Operational details he'd missed. Nina's voice carried contempt. Ethan Cole is a coward who hides in mountains. I don't care about his war with you. I want to live, to be free. Take the ledger, let the girl go. Mason's laugh was sharp, unpleasant. And what do I do with you? He moved closer, menacing. You killed one of my men at your camp. Nina didn't flinch. He was trying to drag me to a wagon. I defended myself. The standoff hung there, Mason circling beneath Nina's position, his men spreading out, everyone armed, everyone tense. Jack stayed still, processing the name confusion, realizing Nina was running con he didn't understand. Mason's voice turned almost pleasant. You've got spirit. I like that. Tell you what, give me the ledger. I keep the girl. You walk away. No, girl goes free. You're not in position to negotiate. I burned the ledger. The words hit Mason like physical blow. His face darkened, and he lunged forward, grabbing imaginary throat. Nina was too high to reach, but the motion showed his rage. Jack's voice cut across the canyon, ringing clear. She's lying, Marcus. I have it. The name, Marcus instead of Mason, Ethan instead of Jack, clicked pieces into place. This wasn't about him. Nina had substituted names, running operation against different enemy, buying confusion that might save them all. But Mason's response proved Jack wrong. His smile was terrible. Nice try. But I know who you are, Jack McCrae, and I know who she is, and I know that ledger is in her belly along with my brother's baby. The truth came out twisted, revealing operational intelligence Jack hadn't counted on. Mason knew everything, had played along with Nina's misdirection for entertainment, controlled the board more completely than they'd realized. Jack stepped forward, rifle raising. Let my daughter go. Now. Mason's men raised their weapons, 6 against 2, 7 counting Nina, but she was pregnant and exposed. The math was ugly. Then Jack spoke words that changed the equation. You really want to do this, brother? In front of your daughter? The word brother hung in air like grenade with pulled pin. Mason's face showed impact, rage, and recognition, warring. Every weapon stayed raised, nobody moving, the moment balanced on edge of violence. Fine. Let's see if you're as fast as you used to be. Mason's hand moved toward his pistol. Jack's rifle came up. The canyon held its breath. Nina fired first. The shot cracked like thunder and Mason spun, dropped, her bullet taking him in the shoulder. Not kill shot, deliberate choice, disabling, not executing. His pistol fell, and chaos erupted. Automatic fire raked the canyon, bullets sparking off stone. Jack dropped, rolled, came up shooting. 2 of Mason's men went down before they found cover. Nina's rifle barked again, third man clutching his leg, collapsing. Sarah used the confusion, twisting free from her captor's distracted grips, running toward Jack with hands still bound. Bullets chased her, kicking up snow and rock chips. Jack's heart stopped, but she made it, diving behind the boulder he'd positioned behind. Jack cut her restraints with his knife, ripped tape from her mouth. She was crying, gasping, but alive and moving. His words came fast and certain. Run, west exit, through the rockfall. FBI coming. Don't stop, Sarah shook her head violently. I'm not leaving you. The remaining men were advancing, using vehicles for cover, laying suppressive fire. Nina was pinned, couldn't relocate without exposing herself. Jack was in the open, cancer making his movements slower than they should be. The calculation was simple. Someone had to buy time. Someone had to hold them here long enough for Sarah to escape. Go, Jack's roar carried command that cut through gunfire. Now Sarah looked at him with eyes that knew this was goodbye. The moment stretched, containing lifetime of love and loss and lessons learned. Then she was moving, low and fast, disappearing into shadows toward the west wall. 2 of Mason's men broke off to pursue. Jack shot one, missed the second. But Nina's rifle barked, and the man went down hard, not getting up. Mason, bleeding from shoulder, crawled toward his fallen pistol. Jack's shot missed by inches. The tremor in his hands worse under stress, cancer stealing precision he'd once taken for granted. His follow-up caught Mason in the leg, and the younger man screamed, rage and pain mixing. The remaining 3 men concentrated fire on Jack's position. Rock exploded around him, fragments cutting his face, the boulder providing cover that wouldn't last. His rifle clicked and empty, and he dropped it, drawing pistol, knowing the range was too far for accuracy. Nina repositioned, her movement drawing fire, buying Jack seconds. Her shot took another man down, but return fire forced her flat. Jack could see that her belly pressing against stone, the baby she was trying to protect while protecting him. The math was clear. 3 of them against 4 enemies, but Jack was dying, Nina was pregnant, Sarah was 12. They couldn't win through firepower. Had to change the equation. Jack's voice cut through the K, directed at Mason, who was propped against a vehicle, face gray with blood loss. Cole, this is between us. Let them go. Mason's laugh was wet, bubbling. You don't get to negotiate, not anymore. Then Jack said the thing he'd been avoiding, the truth that might matter. I didn't know about you. If I had, I would have come back for you and your mother. Cole's bitter response showed the words had landed but changed nothing. Liar! The accusation deserved honest answer. Jack's voice dropped, going quiet in a way that somehow carried. I'm dying, cancer. Months left. I've got no reason to lie. The revelation hit Cole visibly. Information he hadn't expected, complication he hadn't planned for. His father, biological father, was dying. The revenge he'd built his life around was racing a terminal diagnosis. Jack continued, each word costing him. I can't change the past, can't bring men back, but I can give you choice. Kill me. Let Sarah and Nina go. You get your revenge. They get their lives. The offer hung in frozen air. Cole's men paused, waiting for orders, sensing something shifting in their leader. Nina's voice carried from her position, strong despite the vulnerability of her situation. Or you let them all go and you face justice. Daniel's files include you, your network, everything. FBI is coming. You know this. Cole's face twisted. Then we all die together. He cocked his pistol towards Sarah's last location, but she was gone, through the rockfall, beyond his reach. Jack made his decision. He stood, stepping from cover, arms spread, pistol dropping to snow. I'm unarmed. Kill me. Prove you're stronger than your hate. Every weapon swung toward him. Cole's men ready to end it, waiting for word. Jack stood in the open, accepting whatever came. 78 years of living leading to this moment in frozen canyon under indifferent stars. His final words were quiet but carried to everyone present. Cole, you asked if I remember Min. I do, every day. He was a good man, a father. He raised you. Honor him. Not by becoming a murderer of children, but by being the man he wanted you to be. The silence stretched impossible long. Cole's hand shook, pistol aimed at Jack's chest. Finger on trigger. Life and death balanced on whether decades of hate could be talked down by plea from stranger who happened to share blood. Nina's rifle cracks shattered the moment. Her bullet hit Cole's gun hand, and the pistol flew, taking 2 fingers with it. Cole's scream was animal rage, but he was disarmed, bleeding from multiple wounds, no longer threat. Jack dove for his own pistol as Cole's men opened fire, but they were shooting wild, leadership decapitated. Tactical situation collapsed. Nina dropped 2 more, her aim steady despite impossible angle. The last man standing threw down his weapon, hands raised, shouting surrender. The canyon went quiet except for Cole's moaning and the ringing in everyone's ears. Jack approached Cole slowly, pistol raised but not aimed. The younger man, his son, looked up with eyes full of hate and pain and something else. Confusion, maybe. Or the first crack in certainty that had driven him for 30 years. Cole's voice came weak. You should have killed me. No, you're going to live. Face trial, that's justice. From the man who killed my father. From the man who is your father, and I won't lose another son. The words landed heavy. Cole's face showed the impact, realization washing over features so similar to Jack's own. The biological connection he'd known intellectually became real. Visceral, complicated. Sirens cut through the moment, distant but approaching. FBI had mobilized faster than promised, or local law enforcement had heard gunfire. Either way, help was coming. Nina descended from her perch carefully, rifle slung, hand on belly. She reached Jack, and they stood together, surveying the carnage. 3 dead, 4 wounded, including Cole. 1 surrendered, and somewhere beyond the canyon, Sarah was running towards safety. Jack's legs gave out, exhaustion and cancer and adrenaline crash hitting simultaneously. Nina caught him, lowered him to sit against a rock. Blood on his face from rock fragments, hands shaking worse than before. cough bringing up red. He tried to speak, but Nina shook her head. Save it. You did good. The helicopters appeared over the ridge, searchlights turning night to day. FBI tactical teams rappelled down, securing the scene with efficiency that made Jack's law enforcement heart appreciate professional competence. Tom Briggs appeared, older than Jack remembered, concern replacing his usual bureaucratic calm. He knelt beside Jack, assessing injuries. You look like hell. Feel worse. Jack's attempt at humor fell flat. Where's Sarah? Jack pointed west. Sent her through the rockfall. She's clear. Tom relayed orders to find her, then turned attention to Cole Mason, who was being loaded onto stretcher, FBI medic working to stabilize him. The younger man's eyes found Jack's, held for a moment, that contained everything neither could say. Then he was gone, lifted into helicopter, taking with him the questions of what might have been if Jack had known, if he'd come back, if history had bent different direction. Nina sat beside Jack and they watched the organized chaos of federal response. The evidence she carried, literally carried inside her, would dismantle network that had destroyed hundreds of lives. Daniel's mission, completed at cost of his life, would save people he'd never meet. Jack's voice came out rough. Thank you for not killing him. Nina's response was touching her belly. This baby deserves to know their father wasn't just a killer, that he tried to be better. Cole can be better too. Maybe. The optimism seemed fragile, but Jack didn't challenge it. Hope was luxury, but who was he to deny it to someone who'd earned the right? Sarah's voice cut through his thoughts. She was running toward him, FBI agent trying to keep up, her face streaked with tears and dirt, but alive, whole, safe. She hit him like a missile, arms around his neck, sobbing into his shoulder. Jack held her with what strength remained, feeling his body's limits, knowing this might be last time he could. The words came without planning. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. Sarah pulled back enough to look at him. For what? For all of it. For bringing this to your door. For being Dean, for not being able to protect you forever. Her response was fierce. You protected me tonight. That's enough. But it wasn't, and they both knew it. Cancer didn't care about missions completed, dangers defeated, children saved. It would take him regardless. Probably sooner now, given the stress and exertion. The ambulance arrived, and EMTs tried to separate Sarah from Jack, but she refused, clinging with strength that surprised everyone. Tom Briggs intervened, allowing her to ride along. Understanding some bonds couldn't be broken by protocol. The drive to Cheyenne Memorial took 90 minutes, Jack fading in and out, Sarah's hand gripping his the entire time. Nina rode in second ambulance, being monitored for pregnancy complications. The baby's heartbeat strong despite everything. The hospital's fluorescent lights hurt Jack's eyes after canyon darkness. Doctors descended, running tests, finding nothing immediately life-threatening beyond the cancer that was killing him anyway. The gunfight had accelerated his decline. CT scans showed tumors larger, spreading faster, body giving up under stress it couldn't handle. Dr. Harrison appeared, face grim with knowledge of what the scans meant. Jack read it without needing words. Weeks now, maybe days. The timeline had compressed. Sarah stood beside his bed, refusing to leave even when nurses suggested she should sleep. Her face held determination that reminded Jack of Margaret, of himself, of everyone who'd ever stared down impossible odds and chosen defiance. Nina visited after being cleared, baby unharmed, drive successfully removed through emergency surgery, evidence already in FBI custody. She looked exhausted but relieved. Burden she'd carried finally lifted. Tom Briggs brought news 3 days later, when Jack had recovered enough to sit up without coughing blood. Cole Mason had been charged. Trafficking, murder, conspiracy, enough counts to guarantee life sentence. He'd pleaded guilty, agreed to cooperate, asked for one thing: to see Jack. The request should have seemed absurd, but Jack understood the need. Son wanting to know father before death made it impossible. The knowledge that both of them were running out of time created urgency normal relationships never faced. Sarah's face when Jack told her showed complex emotions: fear, anger, curiosity about the half-brother she'd never known existed. But she didn't object, understanding some conversations had to happen regardless of comfort. The county jail allowed the visit under FBI supervision, recognizing the unique circumstances. Cole sat across the table in orange jumpsuit, hands cuffed, face pale from blood loss and surgery. The shoulder wound would heal. The missing fingers were permanent. The silence stretched long before Cole spoke. "Why are you here?" "Because you're my son." Cole's anger was immediate. Don't do that. You don't get to be my father now. You're right, I don't." The acknowledgement seemed to deflate Cole's rage. He'd expected argument, denial, anything except agreement. Jack continued, choosing honesty over comfort. "I've made a lot of mistakes, killed men, failed people. But my biggest regret is not knowing you existed. If I had known, I would have come back for you and your mother, even though she married men, especially then, to make sure you were taken care of." Cole's skepticism showed clear. "You expect me to believe that?" "I don't expect anything. I'm just telling you truth." Jack slid the photo across the table, the one from Min's pocket, carried for 5 decades. "I kept this. Remembered him as a good man. He raised you right. Ranger training, discipline. You became what you became because of pain, not because of him." Cole picked up the photo, tracing the woman's face with remaining fingers. Tears fell without sound. Decades of grief finally finding release. "I hated you for so long." "I know." Jack's next words came harder than any he'd spoken. "You'll go to prison. Long time. Maybe life. But I'll be there. Visits. Letters. Whatever you want. You're my son. I won't abandon you again." Cole's voice broke. "Why? After everything I did? Because that's what fathers do. They don't give up." The guards signaled time, and Jack stood slowly, body protesting movement. Cole's voice stopped him at the door. "McCrae," Jack turned. "How long do you have?" "The cancer. Months. Maybe less." Cole's face showed emotions too complex to name. I'm... He couldn't finish. "I'll see you next week." As Jack reached the door, Cole called out again. "Jack!" First time using his name, not rank or insult. Jack stopped. "Thank you for not killing me. You're welcome, son." The drive back from the county jail passed in silence. Sarah in the passenger seat watching Jack with the careful attention of someone monitoring a fragile thing for signs of breaking. Jack kept his eyes on the road, hands steady on the wheel through force of will alone. But his mind replayed the conversation with Cole on endless loop. The grief in his son's eyes, the hesitant use of his name, the weight of 30 years' hate starting to crack under the pressure of shared blood. Sarah's voice cut through his thoughts, quiet but insistent. "Do you believe him?" Jack knew what she meant. Did Cole's cooperation, his guilty plea, his request to see Jack again, suggest genuine change? Or just manipulation from someone who'd built a life on deception? The answer came honest, because Sarah deserved nothing less. "I don't know, but I believe people can choose to be better, even after terrible things." The implication hung there. Jack choosing to be better after Vietnam, after failures, after all the ways he'd fallen short. Sarah choosing to be stronger after losing her mother. Nina choosing to fight instead of surrender. Maybe Cole could choose too. Sarah's next question came harder. "Does it bother you that he's my brother?" Jack's hands tightened on the wheel, considering the complexity. A son he'd never known, born from a moment of tenderness in a war zone, raised by a man Jack killed, turned into a monster by grief and rage. And Sarah, his daughter by choice and love, and 13 years of showing up every day, now connected to that stranger by blood neither had asked for. "You're my daughter. Nothing changes that. Cole is complicated. But he's not your responsibility. But he's yours." The statement held no judgment, just observation. And it was true. Cole was Jack's responsibility now. Not to fix, not to redeem, but to witness. To show up the way he should have 34 years ago if he'd known. If circumstances had been different. If the world operated on fairness instead of chance. "Yeah, he's mine." The ranch appeared over the ridge, and Jack felt something in his chest loosen. Home. Whatever time he had left, this was where he'd spend it. Not in hospitals fighting the inevitable, not in courtrooms reliving the past, but here with Sarah and Nina and the baby that would arrive before he left. Nina met them on the porch, face showing relief when she saw them both intact. The FBI had cleared her to stay at the ranch while awaiting trial testimony, and she'd settled in with the quiet efficiency of someone grateful for sanctuary. Her belly had grown noticeably even in the 3 days since the canyon, the baby running out of room, movement visible through her shirt. She handed Jack coffee without asking, understanding what he needed without words. The three of them sat on the porch steps despite the cold, watching the sun paint the mountains in shades of orange and purple, not speaking because words would have diminished the moment. The days that followed blurred together in a rhythm of recovery and decline. Jack's body, pushed past its limits in the canyon, began the final surrender. The cough worsened, bringing blood in quantities that scared Sarah until she learned to hide her fear. His appetite vanished, meals becoming obligations he forced down to keep Sarah from worry. The tremor in his hands spread to his legs, making walking unreliable. Stairs an adventure in controlled falling. Dr. Harrison made a house call 10 days after the canyon, professional courtesy for an old patient he respected. The examination was brief, the prognosis briefer. The cancer had metastasized aggressively, stress accelerating the timeline beyond prediction. Weeks now, not months, maybe days if pneumonia set in, if his heart decided it had carried enough weight. Jack took the news the way he'd taken everything since diagnosis, with the calm of someone who'd already made peace with the ending. The question that mattered wasn't how long, but whether he could hold on until Nina's baby arrived, could give Sarah a few more weeks of normal before she had to learn living without him. Sarah overheard despite their attempts at privacy. She stood in the hallway, back pressed against the wall, processing the updated timeline with the stoicism she'd learned from watching her mother die. When the doctor left, she came to Jack without tears, just quiet determination. Then we make every day count. They did. Sarah read to him every evening, books Jack had always meant to finish. Lonesome Dove, Blood Meridian, old westerns where men faced death with dignity and violence was consequence, not solution. Nina cooked meals that filled the house with smells of life continuing, bread baking, stew simmering, the domestic rituals that made waiting bearable. Jack taught Sarah things he'd been putting off, how to maintain the truck's engine, which lawyers to call if she needed help, where he'd hidden the lockbox containing his will, his pension documents, the deed to the ranch. Practical preparations for a future he wouldn't see, ensuring she'd have foundation to build on. The conversations about what came after grew more frequent, more detailed. Sarah would live with Jack's brother Robert in Montana. Good man, good family, good schools. She'd finish high school, go to college if she wanted, have the normal life Jack had tried and failed to provide. Sarah's resistance was quiet but absolute. I don't want normal. I want you. The statement became refrain, repeated in different forms, each time breaking Jack's heart a little more. He couldn't give her what she wanted, could only try to make what he could give enough. Nina's presence helped in ways Jack hadn't anticipated. She understood grief from living inside it, knew better than to offer platitudes or false hope. Instead, she offered practical help, taking over ranch chores Jack could no longer manage, keeping Sarah company when Jack needed to sleep, providing the steadiness that made each day possible. The three of them fell into rhythms that felt like family. Breakfast together, Jack forcing down eggs he couldn't taste. Morning chores, Sarah and Nina working, while Jack supervised from the porch, offering advice that mostly went unneeded. Afternoons quiet, everyone reading or resting, conserving energy for the evening when they'd gather and pretend tomorrow wasn't approaching. 4 weeks after the canyon, Sheriff Wilson visited with news. Cole Mason's trial had concluded, guilty on all counts, life sentence without parole in ADX Florence, maximum security where he'd never see daylight again. But he'd kept his word, cooperating fully, providing testimony that led to 47 arrests across the trafficking network. The sheriff's weathered face showed something like respect when he delivered Cole's message. Tell my father thank you, and that I'll try to be the man men wanted. Jack absorbed the words, filing them away with all the other complicated truths about his son. Cole would spend his life in a cage, but maybe inside that cage, he'd find something resembling peace. Maybe knowing his biological father hadn't abandoned him by choice would make the years ahead bearable. Sarah asked the question Jack had been avoiding. Will you visit him again? I'd like to. Jack's honesty came rough. But I don't know if I'll have time. The admission hung there, unavoidable math of cancer versus calendar. ADX Florence was in Colorado 6 hours away on good days. Jack's good days were vanishing faster than the snow outside. Sarah's hand found his. Then write him. Tell him what you'd say. That night, Jack sat at his desk with pen and paper, trying to translate 34 years of absence into words that might matter. The letter came slowly, truth requiring precision he didn't trust his failing mind to maintain. Cole. The name felt strange written out. Son he'd never raised, never known, connected by biology and tragedy. I don't know what kind of father I would have been to you if circumstances had been different. I failed plenty with Sarah, and I knew she was coming. But I would have tried. I want you to know that. If I'd known you existed, I would have come back. Would have done my best to be what you needed. The words felt inadequate, but Jack continued. You chose to cooperate. To help take down the network you built. That takes courage. The kind men would have been proud of. The kind I'm proud of, even though I have no right to be. I'm dying, you know that. Cancer's winning, and I don't have much time. But in the time I have left, you're in my thoughts. My son, the one I didn't get to raise, didn't get to know, but love anyway, because that's what fathers do. Be better than me. Better than men. Better than the man you were. You've got decades ahead. Use them. The signature took 3 tries, hands shaking too badly to form letters. Finally, Jack McCrae appeared legible enough, and he folded the letter, addressed the envelope, left it for Sarah to mail. The night brought nightmare, rare for Jack, who usually slept without dreams or slept not at all. But this one grabbed him hard, pulling him back to Vietnam, to the moment that started everything. Jungle darkness, gunfire, Jimmy's scream as bullets found him. The VC soldier emerging from brush, AK-47 rising. Jack's finger on the trigger, squeezing, watching the man fall. Searching the body, finding the photo. But this time when Jack looked at the picture, the baby had Cole's adult face staring up with accusation that needed no words. Then the baby morphed, becoming Sarah, becoming Nina's unborn child, becoming every person his choices had touched and damaged. The photo burst into flames in his hands, and Jack woke gasping, coughing blood onto his pillow. Sarah appeared in his doorway, backlit by hallway light, checking on him the way he used to check on her. You okay? The lie wouldn't come. Jack shook his head, letting her see the fear he usually hid. Sometimes I dream about the people I killed. Wonder if they haunt me or if I haunt myself. Sarah crossed to his bed, sat on the edge, took his hand the way Margaret used to. You did what you had to. You survived. That's not something to feel guilty about. But Jack knew better. Survival required choices, and choices had weight. He'd killed Nguyen Minh because Minh threatened him first. But Minh had been protecting his family, his country, fighting invaders the same way Jack would fight someone threatening Sarah. The moral high ground was muddier than anyone wanted to admit. The conversation drifted into philosophy neither of them had answers for. Whether war made killers or revealed them, whether forgiveness was possible for the unforgivable, whether fathers' sins really visited their sons, or if that was just poetry pretending to be justice. Eventually, Sarah's yawns won, and she returned to bed, leaving Jack alone with thoughts that offered no comfort. He lay awake until dawn, watching the window lighten, counting time in breaths that came harder each passing hour. Spring arrived with the kind of suddenness Wyoming specialized in, snow melting overnight, revealing brown grass that would turn green within days. The temperature climbed from teens to 60s, sun strong enough to make the porch comfortable without a coat. Jack sat there most days now, wheelchair his primary transportation, oxygen tank his constant companion. 4 months had passed since the canyon. 4 months of slow decline, body giving up function by function, while his mind stayed sharp enough to witness every loss. Walking went first, then appetite, then the ability to sleep through the night. Pain became background noise. morphine dulling the worst but leaving him fuzzy in ways he hated. Nina moved through her ninth month with the wariness of someone carrying weight that had stopped being manageable. The baby sat low, active enough that Jack could see movement from across the room, foot pushing against her ribs, hand exploring the limited space. She said the baby was a boy, confirmed by ultrasound, and she planned to name him Daniel after his father. Sarah had turned 13 2 weeks ago, the birthday celebrated with cake Nina baked, and presents Jack had bought months ago when shopping was still possible. She'd grown 3 inches since Christmas, shooting up the way teenagers did, losing the last softness of childhood in favor of angles that suggested the woman she'd become. The three of them formed a strange family, dying man, pregnant widow, orphan-to-be, but family nonetheless. Morning ritual involved Sarah getting Jack outside, settling him in the wheelchair with blankets and oxygen, bringing coffee he'd take 2 sips of before losing interest. Nina joined them, moving slowly, one hand always on her belly, the other carrying whatever breakfast she'd managed to pull together. They watched sunrises without speaking, understanding the value of quiet moments when time was running out. Jack memorized details. The way Sarah's hair caught light, the way Nina hummed softly when the baby kicked, the way mountains held snow in crevices even as valley floors turned green. The voice in his head, quieter now, offered reflection. Funny how life works. Thought I'd die alone. Bitter. Empty. But I'm dying surrounded by family. That's more than I deserved. Sheriff Wilson's truck appeared on the access road one afternoon in late April, raising dust that hadn't been visible when snow covered everything. Jack watched him approach with the patience of someone who had nowhere else to be, nothing more pressing than whatever news the sheriff brought. Wilson climbed the porch steps with the careful movement of a man who'd put on weight and felt it in his knees. He declined coffee, accepted the chair Nina brought, and delivered his message with the directness of old friends who'd stopped bothering with preambles. Cole Mason. Pleaded guilty. Life sentence confirmed. But he's doing something unexpected. Jack waited. Knowing Wilson's sense of drama required the pause. He's completing his GED in prison. Joined a program helping other inmates. Teaches reading to guys who never learn. The warden says he's been model prisoner, which is saying something for ADX Florence, where model just means not actively trying to kill guards. The image of Cole, his son, teaching other prisoners to read struck Jack as impossibly hopeful, from trafficker to teacher, from destroyer to builder. Maybe redemption wasn't mythology after all. Wilson continued. He asked me to tell you something, said, "Tell my father thank you, and that I'm trying to be the man men wanted." Jack's throat tightened, words made difficult by emotion and the fluid accumulating in his lungs. That means something to him? Being the man men wanted? Wilson nodded. From what the prison counselor tells me, he's working through a lot. Grief, guilt, the whole mess. Talks about Min as the man who raised him. Talks about you as the man who gave him life. Trying to honor both. Sarah appeared in the doorway listening. When Wilson left, she asked the question Jack had been turning over. Do you think he means it? Or is it just prison behavior, trying to look good? Jack watched dust settle on the road, considering. I think pain can teach people, if they're willing to learn. Cole's got decades of pain ahead. Maybe he'll use them to become something better. The philosophy felt fragile, but Jack needed to believe it. Needed to think his son, the one he'd failed by never knowing, never searching, never being there, could salvage meaning from the wreckage of his life. That evening, Sarah read to Jack from the book of poetry Margaret had loved. The verses about mortality and memory, beauty and loss, the things that mattered when nothing else did. Jack's eyes closed, not sleeping but listening, letting the rhythm of Sarah's voice carry him away from pain and failing organs. When she finished, his question surprised them both. Do you think you'll see Mom again? After, Sarah's pause stretched long. I don't know, Dad, but if you do, tell her about me, how strong I became. Jack promised, though he suspected death was oblivion, not reunion, silence, not salvation. But if he was wrong, if something waited beyond, Margaret would be first person he'd seek. Had 13 years of updates to share about the daughter she'd forgotten before leaving. Nina's water broke at 3 in the morning, sudden and messy, soaking through sheets she'd only changed the day before. Her gasp woke Sarah, whose room was closest, and Sarah's shout woke Jack, who'd been dozing in morphine haze that passed for sleep. Ambulance was called, but the dispatcher's voice held bad news. Severe accident on the highway, EMS tied up for at least 90 minutes. Nina's contractions were already 5 minutes apart, the baby not waiting for professional help. Jack's field medic training kicked in despite his body's limitations. From the wheelchair, he directed Sarah, boil water, find clean towels, get the medical kit from the bathroom. His voice carried authority that cut through panic, steady despite circumstances. Nina labored on the couch, trying to breathe through contractions that were coming faster, harder, the baby deciding tonight was the night regardless of preparation. Sweat soaked her hair, and her hands gripped Sarah's with strength that would leave bruises. Jack wheeled closer, coaching from memory of helping Margaret birth Sarah, from training that taught him to deliver babies in combat zones when doctors were miles away. The mechanics hadn't changed. Monitor contractions, check dilation, encourage breathing, watch for complications. Sarah's face showed terror and determination, fighting for dominance. She'd never seen birth, never imagined she'd be midwife at 13, but she followed Jack's instructions with the focus that had gotten them through everything else. Push, that's it. Again. Nina screamed, the sound raw and primal, forcing life into world through will and biology. The baby's head crowned, then shoulders, then full body sliding into Sarah's shaking hands. The cry came immediately, healthy, angry, demanding attention. Sarah lifted the baby with reverence that made Jack's vision blur, placing him on Nina's chest while following Jack's instructions for cutting the cord, clearing airways, checking vitals that all seemed miraculously normal. A boy, as predicted, 7 pounds of squalling protest at the cold air and bright lights, small fists waving, face scrunched in outrage that was somehow beautiful. Nina was crying, laughing, exhausted beyond words, but holding her son with the ferocity of someone who'd fought too hard to ever let go. She looked at Jack, then Sarah, then back to the baby. What should we name him? Jack's voice came rough with emotion. Daniel, after his father. Nina's tears flowed harder. Daniel Jack, after both his fathers. Sarah's protest was immediate. Jack wasn't the baby's father, but Nina's look silenced her. He's protected us, saved us, gave us home when we had none. That makes him father enough. Jack couldn't speak, throat closed with feeling he'd thought cancer had burned out of him. Sarah brought the baby to him, placed the small weight in Jack's arms with the care of handling something infinitely precious. The baby's eyes opened, dark and unfocused, seeing nothing but somehow looking directly at Jack. The moment stretched, old man holding new life, beginning meeting ending, the cycle completing itself. Jack's voice when it came was barely whisper. Hello, Daniel. Welcome to the world. The baby's hand found Jack's finger, gripped with surprising strength, and something in Jack's chest that had been wound tight for months finally released. This was what he'd been meant to protect. Not just Sarah, not just Nina, but this baby who carried two fathers' legacies, who represented hope that life continued beyond individual deaths. The ambulance arrived 40 minutes later, paramedics finding mother and child both stable, healthier than expected, given the circumstances. They transported Nina and Daniel to the hospital for observation, leaving Jack and Sarah alone in the house that suddenly felt too quiet. Sarah cleaned up, moving with efficiency that spoke of needing action over thought. Jack watched from his wheelchair, knowing his time was measured in days now, feeling the cancer's final assault beginning. He'd held on long enough, witnessed the birth, met the baby who'd carried Daniel Blackwater's name forward. His body, given permission to quit, began the shutdown. Sarah noticed first, Dad, you okay? The honest answer was no. Chest pain radiating down his left arm, vision tunneling, breathing becoming work instead of reflex. But saying it would bring panic, would force Ferrero to choose between staying with him and going to the hospital where Nina and Daniel were. Fine. Just tired. The lie was transparent, but Sarah accepted it because the alternative was unbearable. She helped him to bed, tucked blankets around him with the care he'd once used tucking her in. The role reversal hurt in ways he couldn't articulate. Sleep came in fragments, nightmares mixing with memories until Jack couldn't tell difference. Margaret's face, young and laughing. Sarah as a baby. Vietnam jungles. Cole's eyes staring at him with hate and hope mixed. The canyon, the blood, the endless weight of choices made and unmade. He woke to find Sarah beside him, reading her journal aloud. The entry from today, processing the birth she'd helped deliver, the fear and wonder mixed. I helped bring life into the world, Mom. Me, 13 years old, and I delivered a baby. Dad coached me through it, his voice steady even though I know he's in pain. Even dying, he's still teaching me, still showing me how to be strong. Jack's hand found hers, squeezed once. The gesture said what words couldn't. Pride, love, gratitude for daughter who'd become woman while he wasn't watching. 2 days passed in blur of hospital visits and home care. Nina and Daniel were discharged, returning to the ranch that had become sanctuary. The baby filled the house with sounds Jack had forgotten. Crying, cooing, the small noises of life demanding attention. Sarah hovered between caring for Jack and helping Nina, stretched thin but refusing to admit she couldn't handle both. Jack watched her exhaust herself and hurt with inability to make it easier. His decline became impossible to hide. Food stayed down minutes before coming back up. The cough produced blood in quantities that scared everyone. Consciousness became optional, drifting in and out without warning. Dr. Harrison made final house call, confirming what they all knew. Days, maybe hours. The cancer had won completely, was now just waiting for Jack's body to accept defeat. Jack's request was simple. I want to die outside, watching the sunset. Sarah's face crumbled, but she nodded. Nina helped move him to the porch, settling him in the wheelchair with blankets despite the warm April evening. Baby Daniel slept in Nina's arms, peaceful and unaware of the grief surrounding him. The sun began its descent, painting mountains in shades of gold and crimson, the kind of beauty that made you believe in something beyond yourself. Jack watched with the focus of someone memorizing a last meal, storing images for whatever came after. His words came slow, forced through lungs that no longer wanted to work. To Sarah, I'm so proud of you. You're stronger than I ever was. You'll do great things. Be kind, be brave. Remember, a man's worth isn't his strength. It's what he protects. Sarah's tears fell silent, but she held his hand, letting him speak. To Nina, take care of her. And Daniel, teach him about his real father, about honor. Nina's voice was steady despite crying. I will. Always. Jack's gaze moved to the baby, the mountains, the sky turning purple with approaching night. I thought I'd die alone. Bitter. Empty. But I'm dying surrounded by family. That's more than I deserved. Sarah's protest was fierce. You deserved everything, Dad. The sun touched the horizon and Jack felt his body letting go, each system shutting down in sequence. Pain receding into numbness that felt like peace. His last words came as whisper. Beautiful. His eyes closed. His hand went slack in Sarah's. The breath that had been coming ragged stopped coming at all. Jack McCrae died as the sun set on April 28th, surrounded by the people he'd saved, protecting to the very end, finding in death what had eluded him in life, the certainty that he'd mattered, that his sacrifices counted, that the measure of a man wasn't his years, but his impact. Sarah's grief was quiet at first, contained, then breaking, like dam giving way. She held his hand long after it went cold, rocking back and forth, making sounds that had no words. Nina's arm came around her, both of them crying, baby Daniel stirring at the noise, but settling when Nina whispered that everything would be okay, even though nothing felt okay and might not for a very long time. The stars came out, indifferent and eternal, watching as three people sat with one body, waiting for something that never came. Relief, understanding, acceptance. Only the weight remained, the empty space where a man had been, the silence that would take years to stop feeling like abandonment. Epilogue. 1 year later. The cemetery sat on a hillside overlooking the Laramie Range, graves arranged in rows that followed the land's natural contours. Jack's plot occupied the eastern section, where morning sun hit first. a detail Sarah had insisted on because her father had always risen with dawn. The headstone was simple granite, words carved deep enough to last decades. Jack McCrae, 1947-2025. Marine Marshal, father. He stood when others ran. Sarah stood before it on the anniversary of his death. 14 now, taller than she'd been last spring, hair pulled back the way her mother used to wear it. The year had aged her in ways that had nothing to do with time. Eyes harder, shoulders straighter. The last softness of childhood burned away by grief that demanded she grow up faster than fair. Nina stood beside her, baby Daniel on her hip, the boy just past his first birthday, walking now, babbling in the language only toddlers understood. He reached toward the headstone, small hand opening and closing, wanting to touch the cold stone that meant nothing to him yet, but would someday. The flowers Sarah placed were wildflowers from the ranch, the kind that grew despite Wyoming's harsh conditions, surviving through stubbornness and adaptation. She'd picked them this morning, walking the property her father had loved, trying to feel his presence in familiar places and finding only absence. Her voice when she spoke was steady, practiced from doing this every week for 52 weeks, updating a dead man on a life he'd never see. Dad, it's been a year. I miss you every day. But I'm okay. We're all okay. The lie tasted familiar. She wasn't okay. Wouldn't be for years. Maybe never. But saying it made the impossible slightly more bearable, gave her something to work toward even when working felt pointless. Nina's hand found Sarah's shoulder, squeeze offering comfort that words couldn't. They'd become practiced at this, supporting each other through grief's unpredictable assaults. The moments when missing someone became physical pain that stole breath and balance. Daniel squirmed, wanting down, and Nina set him on the grass where he immediately toddled toward the headstone, fascinated by the way sunlight caught the polished surface. Sarah watched him, seeing Daniel Blackwater's features emerging as the baby became a child, his father's nose, his mother's eyes, something entirely his own in the set of his jaw. This is Daniel, Dad. He's walking now, talking a little, says Mama, and no, and more. Nina says he's stubborn like you. The comparison made Sarah's throat tight, connection between grandfather and grandson who'd never meet. Sheriff Wilson's truck appeared on the cemetery road, raising dust that hung in still air. He visited Jack's grave monthly, old friendship requiring the gesture, and he always brought news about Cole. Sarah had come to expect these updates, half dreading and half needing them. The complicated truth about her half-brother, something she was still learning to carry. Wilson climbed from his truck with the careful movement of someone whose knees protested stairs and hills. He nodded to Nina, ruffled Daniel's hair, then turned to Sarah with expression that suggested today's news was different from the usual reports about prison education programs and good behavior. Got something to tell you. Cole Mason. He's been approved for a correspondence program, mentoring at-risk youth through letters. Warden says he's been remarkable. Earned his GED, bachelor's degree through prison program, now helping other inmates do the same. The information settled heavy. Cole, trafficker, killer, the man who'd kidnapped Sarah and tried to murder her father, was teaching others, building something from the wreckage of his destroyed life. The cognitive dissonance hurt, wanting to hate him while recognizing that redemption might actually be possible. There's more. Wilson's pause suggested he was measuring how Sarah would receive what came next. He asked the counselor to reach out to you, wants to know if you'd be willing to exchange letters. No pressure, just he'd like to know his sister, if you're willing. Sarah's immediate instinct was refusal. Why would she want contact with someone who'd caused such pain? But looking at her father's grave, remembering his final weeks when he'd visited Cole in prison, tried to build something from nothing, she understood the request differently. Cole was family, complicated, damaged, dangerous family, but blood nonetheless. The answer came slower than Wilson expected. Can I think about it? Of course. His relief suggested he'd expected outright rejection. Take all the time you need. After Wilson left, Nina asked the question Sarah had been avoiding. What do you want to do? Sarah traced her father's name with one finger, feeling the carved letters, trying to channel what Jack would advise. He'd chosen connection over hatred, chosen to see Cole as son despite everything. Could she do less with a brother she'd never chosen but couldn't undo? I think Dad would want me to try. Nina's nod held understanding. Your father believed people could change, could be better. Maybe Cole's proving him right. The walk back to the truck passed in silence. Daniel chattering to himself, pointing at birds and clouds, delighted by world he was just beginning to understand. Sarah envied that innocence, remembered when her own world had been simple, before death and violence taught her that safety was illusion and people you loved left without warning. The ranch appeared over the ridge, and Sarah felt the familiar tightness in her chest. Home, but also the place where everything had fallen apart. The barn where they'd stacked bodies. The porch where her father had died. The bedroom that still smelled like him, despite Nina washing the sheets, airing out the space, trying to make it livable again. Sarah had moved into that room 2 months ago, unable to sleep in her old space anymore, needing to be where he'd last been. Nina hadn't argued, understanding that grief required strange accommodations, that healing wasn't linear and couldn't be rushed. Inside, the house had changed in subtle ways. Nina's things mixed with the McCrae family history, photos of Daniel Blackwater beside those of Margaret, baby Daniel's toys scattered among Sarah's books. The kitchen reorganized to accommodate someone who actually cooked instead of just heating canned soup. They'd become family through necessity and choice, bound by shared trauma and the practical reality that neither could afford to leave. Nina had no other home, no family who'd take her in with a baby. Sarah had no parents, no guardian except her uncle in Montana who'd reluctantly agreed she could stay at the ranch if Nina provided adult supervision. The arrangement worked better than either had expected. Nina needed help with Daniel, and Sarah needed purpose beyond her own grief. They split chores, shared meals, existed in companionable silence that felt more sustainable than forced cheerfulness. Evening brought the ritual they'd established. Dinner together, Sarah reading while Nina nursed Daniel, then quiet time on the porch watching the sunset because that's what Jack would have done. The routine honored him while building something new, tradition that acknowledged loss without being consumed by it. Sarah's journal lay open on her lap, pen hovering over blank page, trying to find words for the tangle of emotions Wilson's news had created. The entry started the way they all did. Dear Mom, today marks 1 year since Dad died. I stood at his grave and told him I'm okay, even though I'm not. Even though some days getting out of bed feels impossible and the world seems designed to hurt people who love too much. The pen paused, Sarah staring at mountains that held the last light, trying to articulate what came next. Sheriff Wilson says Cole wants to write to me. My half-brother, the man who kidnapped me, who tried to kill Dad, who's in prison for life because he destroyed hundreds of lives building his empire. But also Dad's son, the baby in that photo from Vietnam. The person Dad chose to forgive, to visit, to call son, even after everything. I don't know what to do. Part of me wants to tell Cole to rot in his cell, to suffer the way Dad suffered, the way all his victims suffered. But another part, the part that sounds like Dad, says everyone deserves a chance to be better. That refusing connection makes me smaller, not him. What would you do, Mom? Would you write back? Would you try to know the person who shares my blood, but none of my history? The question hung unanswered. Margaret 3 years dead and unable to provide guidance. Sarah closed the journal, decision still unmade, future uncertain in ways that felt overwhelming. Nina's voice carried from inside. Sarah? Someone's here. The headlights cutting across the yard belonged to Tom Briggs's FBI sedan, unexpected at this hour. Sarah's first thought was new threat, danger finding them again, but Tom's face when he emerged held no alarm, just the careful neutrality of someone delivering news that could go either way. Evening, Sarah. Nina. Tom's greeting was formal, professional, the persona he wore when representing the Bureau instead of acting as friend. Mind if we talk inside? The conversation happened at the kitchen table, Daniel asleep upstairs, Nina and Sarah flanking each other in unconscious, defensive positioning. Tom spread documents between them, case files and photographs that made Sarah's stomach clench. The trafficking network Cole built. We've been dismantling it for a year now. 47 arrests, 156 victims recovered. But we found something else. Evidence Cole had been keeping. Insurance maybe, or guilt. Tom pushed a file towards Sarah. Inside were photos of women Native American, all bearing resemblance to Nina. Names, dates, locations where they'd been taken. Some were marked with red X's, deceased. Others had green checks, recovered alive. Your father's actions, yours and Nina's, they didn't just take down one network. They triggered a cascade. Cole's cooperation gave us access to connections we'd been chasing for years. We've freed people who'd been missing for decades, returned daughters to families who'd given up hope. The weight of that information settled slowly. Jack's final mission, the stand that killed him, had rippled outward in ways none of them could have predicted. Lives saved by his choice to protect instead of hide, to fight instead of surrender. Nina's hand covered her mouth, tears spilling. Daniel would have wanted this, all of it. The thought that his death, our survival, it mattered this much. Tom's expression softened. It mattered. You all mattered, and I wanted you to know that. After Tom left, Sarah and Nina sat in silence, processing the revelation. The guilt Sarah carried, that her father had died protecting her, that his last weeks had been pain and fear, shifted slightly. Not gone, but recontextualized. He'd died doing what he'd always done, standing between predators and prey. The fact that it cost him everything didn't diminish the value, it proved it. Nina's voice when she spoke held new resolve. We should tell people what your father did, what we all did, not for glory, for the families who got their daughters back. They deserve to know who made that possible. The idea took root. Not a memorial in the traditional sense, but acknowledgement that Jack McCrae's final act had saved people he'd never meet, that his death had meaning beyond the grief it left behind. Sarah's decision about Cole came that night. Lying in her father's bed, staring at ceiling, her father had stared at during his final weeks. If Jack could forgive the son who tried to destroy him, could try to build connection from ruins, then Sarah could extend the same grace to the brother she'd never known. She wrote the letter at midnight, words coming easier than expected. Cole, I don't know how to start this. You're my brother, but I don't know you. You kidnapped me. You tried to kill my father, but he called you son before he died, and that has to mean something. The sheriff says you're trying to be better, teaching other prisoners, working toward degrees, becoming the man men wanted, the man Dad believed you could be. I want to believe that's real. Want to think people can change, that your past doesn't have to be your future. So I'm writing. Not because I forgive you, I'm not there yet, might never be, but because refusing connection makes me smaller. Because Dad would want me to treat her. Because you're my brother and family is supposed to show up even when it's hard. Tell me about Min, the man who raised you, what he taught you, what he believed in, why you're working so hard to honor his memory. Maybe understanding where you came from will help me understand who you are now. The signature felt weighted with meaning Sarah didn't fully grasp. Your sister, Sarah. She mailed the letter the next morning, committing to uncertainty, opening door to a relationship that might heal or harm. But sitting in inaction felt worse than risking pain, so she chose movement over paralysis. Cole's response arrived 3 weeks later, envelope bearing ADX Florence postmark, handwriting surprisingly neat for someone missing 2 fingers. Sarah opened it with hands that shook, Nana beside her for support, both of them braced for content that could be manipulation or genuine. Sarah, I don't have words for what your letter meant. I've been sitting in this cell for a year, working through everything I did, everyone I hurt, trying to become something other than the monster I was. Your willingness to write, to try, it's more than I deserve. Min. The letter's focus shifted, and Sarah recognized deflection. Easier to talk about adoptive father than confront his own crimes. He was a soldier, like Jack, like me, before I let hatred destroy what training built. He fought for his country, his family, believing in something bigger than himself. When my mother married him, he took me as his own. Never treated me differently than if I'd been his blood. Taught me discipline, honor, the importance of standing for what's right even when it costs you. I dishonored everything he stood for when I chose revenge over redemption. Jack, our father, he reminded me of men in ways that made rage complicated. Both were soldiers who fought for others. Both carried guilt for violence they'd been forced to commit. Both tried to be better than war made them. I'm trying to teach guys in here who never had education, who made worse choices than I did from worse circumstances. It's not enough. Can't undo the lives I destroyed, the families I shattered. But it's something. It's all I have. Thank you for writing, for trying. It means more than you know. Your brother Cole. The letter's tone, vulnerable, honest, devoid of the manipulation Sarah had feared, shifted something in her perception. Cole wasn't asking for forgiveness, wasn't making excuses, just acknowledging reality and working within it. That felt authentic in ways that made Sarah's guard lower slightly. She wrote back. Then again, letters became monthly exchange, Cole sharing prison life's mundane details and the slow work of becoming educated, Sarah updating him on ranch life and Daniel's development. The relationship stayed careful, bounded by history neither could erase, but genuine in its incremental trust building. 6 months into their correspondence, Cole asked the question Sarah had been avoiding. Can I write to Nina, apologize for what I took from her? Sarah brought the request to Nina, who'd been listening to Sarah's letter updates without commenting, processing her own complicated feelings about the man who'd ordered her husband's torture. Nina's response came after long silence. I don't know if I can forgive him. Daniel died screaming, and Cole made that happen. But if he's genuine about being better, maybe hearing what his actions cost will help him understand why the work matters. The letter Nina wrote was brutal in its honesty, sparing no detail of Daniel's final hours, the sounds he'd made, the way he'd refused to break even as they destroyed his body. She described their unborn child kicking while she listened to torture, the knowledge that Daniel died buying her seconds to escape. Your choices killed my husband, orphaned my son, destroyed my life. No amount of teaching prisoners to read erases that. No degree makes you less responsible. But Daniel believed in rehabilitation, believed people could change if given tools and support. So I'm telling you this not to hurt you, but to make sure you understand the weight of what you're trying to atone for. Every person you help is one small payment on a debt you'll never finish paying. Be better. Not for forgiveness, you don't get that from me, but because Daniel deserved better than dying for evidence that put you away. Honor his sacrifice by becoming what he believed people could be. Cole's response came weeks later, short and devastated. I have no words, just sorrow, just commitment to spend every day trying to deserve the chance I was given that Daniel wasn't. The exchange continued sporadically. Nina and Cole building something that wasn't friendship but resembled accountability. The victim ensuring her victimizer never forgot the cost of his redemption. Summer brought change. Sarah's uncle Robert called asking if she'd reconsidered moving to Montana now that year had passed. The ranch was isolated, Robert argued. No place for a teenage girl without adult guidance. Nina tried her best, but she wasn't family, wasn't legal guardian, couldn't provide the structure Sarah needed. Sarah's refusal was immediate and absolute. This is home. Dad's here. I'm not leaving. Robert's frustration bled through the phone. Sarah, you can't live in the past. Your father's gone. You need to move forward, build a future. The conversation ended badly. Robert threatening to petition for custody, Sarah threatening to run if he tried. Nina, listening from the kitchen, waited until Sarah hung up before speaking. If you want to stay, I'll fight for you. But Robert's not wrong. You need stability, education, opportunity this ranch can't provide. Sarah's response was fierce. This ranch is where I learned everything that matters, where Dad taught me to stand when others run, to protect what's weak, to be better than easy. Going to Montana won't make me safer. It'll just make me forget what he died teaching me. The argument wasn't about the ranch, and both of them knew it. It was about holding on to someone who'd left, refusing to accept that life continued beyond loss. Nina understood because she'd done the same, clinging to the ranch because leaving felt like abandoning Daniel's memory. But eventually Nina's voice carried weight Sarah couldn't ignore. What would your father want? Would he want you stuck here, frozen, unable to move because moving feels like betrayal? Or would he want you building a life that honors what he taught by living it fully? The question had no easy answer. Sarah spent the night walking the property, visiting places that held memories. The barn where they'd prepared for siege, the porch where Jack had died, the creek where Nina had been found. Each location whispered that staying was choosing grief over growth, comfort over courage. By morning, Sarah had made her decision, one that hurt and helped simultaneously. I'll go to Montana, for school, for the future Dad wanted me to have. But this stays home. I come back summers, holidays, whenever I need to remember. Nina's hug was tight, relieved, both of them crying because the decision was right and devastating. You can always come back. This will always be here. The remaining weeks of summer passed in preparation, packing Sarah's belongings, arranging for Nina to manage the ranch, setting up schedules for letters and visits. Daniel toddled around oblivious to the coming change, his cheerful babbling a reminder that life continued even when individual lives fractured. Sarah's final night at the ranch, she sat on the porch watching sunset paint mountains the colors her father had loved. Nina joined her chair, Daniel sleeping in her arms, the three of them silhouetted against the dying light. He'd be proud of you. Nina's voice was soft, choosing the hard thing, the thing that grows you instead of keeps you safe. Sarah leaned into Nina's shoulder, the closest thing to a mother she had now. Think he's watching? Somewhere? Nina's answer was honest. I don't know, but I think the watching doesn't matter as much as the living. We honor them by being who they believed we could be. The conversation drifted into silence, both women processing the year that had changed everything, the losses that had forced them to become stronger than they'd wanted to be. Sarah's journal entry that night was the longest she'd written since her father's death. Dear Mom and Dad, tomorrow I leave for Montana, Uncle Robert's family, a normal life or as normal as possible after everything. Part of me feels like I'm abandoning you both, leaving behind the ranch that holds every memory. But another part, the part that sounds like Dad, knows staying would dishonor what he died teaching me. He stood when others ran, fought when surrender was easier, protected the weak even when it cost him everything. I can't do that from this ranch, hiding from a world that's too big and scary. I have to go into it, carrying what he taught, being the person he believed I could become. Cole writes that he's trying to be the man men wanted. Nina lives honoring Daniel's belief in rehabilitation. I'll live honoring what you both taught me. Mom's kindness, Dad's courage, the stubborn refusal to quit that runs in our blood. I'll come back. This will always be home. But I have to leave to understand why it matters. Montana brought adjustment that took months. Uncle Robert's family was kind but foreign, their normalcy jarring after the intensity of the past year. Sarah struggled with school, with peers whose biggest concerns were grades and social drama, with the disconnect between her reality and theirs. But slowly, painfully, she adapted. Made friends who didn't know her history. Joined the shooting team where her skills, taught by a dying marshal preparing her for war, made her exceptional. Started therapy with a counselor who specialized in trauma, learning to process grief in ways that didn't require becoming someone else. Letters from Nina arrived weekly, updates on Daniel's development, ranch maintenance, the quiet life continuing in Wyoming. Letters from Cole came monthly, his progress through prison education programs, the students he was helping, the slow work of becoming someone men would recognize. Sarah wrote back to both, maintaining connections that mattered while building new ones. The balance was delicate but sustainable, honoring the past while constructing a future. Spring came again, 1 year after leaving, and Sarah returned to Wyoming for her 15th birthday. The ranch looked the same, weathered buildings, fence lines needing repair, mountains holding snow in high crevices. But Daniel had grown, walking confidently now, speaking in sentences, calling Sarah Ra, because his mouth couldn't quite form her full name. Nina looked different too, less haunted, more present, the weight of early grief settling into something she could carry without collapsing. The baby fat was gone, replaced by muscle from ranch work, skin darker from hours in sun. They celebrated Sarah's birthday with cake Nina baked in presents that showed careful attention. Books Sarah had mentioned wanting, a new hunting knife to replace the one that had broken, a framed photo of Jack holding newborn Daniel, the only picture of them together. That evening, Sarah asked to visit her father's grave. Nina offered to come, but Sarah needed this alone, one-on-one conversation with silence and stone. The walk took 20 minutes, and Sarah used the time to rehearse what she'd say. A year of growth to report, decisions to explain, gratitude to express for lessons that kept paying dividends. At the grave, she knelt, tracing his name with fingers that had grown calloused from Montana ranch work Uncle Robert required. The flowers she'd brought were wildflowers again, the stubborn kind that survived Wyoming's harshness. Dad, I'm 15 now, taller than Nina, almost as tall as you were, living in Montana with Uncle Robert, going to school, being normal in ways that feel weird after everything. But I'm doing what you'd want, learning, growing, being strong because you showed me how. I'm on the shooting team, best in the state at long-range rifle. The coach says I'm a natural, but we both know it's because you taught me breathing. Patience, the respect that makes weapons tools instead of toys. Cole's doing well. He earned his bachelor's degree, started teaching full-time in the prison, helps guys get their GED, writes letters to their families, builds hope in a place designed to destroy it. He's becoming the man you believed he could be. Nina and Daniel are good. The baby's not a baby anymore, walking, talking, terrorizing the chickens. Nina says he's got your stubbornness, which I think means she's got her hands full. And me, I'm okay. Some days are hard. Some days I miss you so much it hurts to breathe. But I'm living, fighting, standing when it would be easier to run, being the daughter you died protecting. Thank you for everything, for teaching me to be strong, for showing me what matters, for sacrificing everything so I could have anything. I love you, Dad, always. The words settled into silence, and Sarah sat with her father's grave until sunset painted the sky colors he'd loved. Then she stood, walked back to the ranch where Nina and Daniel waited, carried the weight of loss that had become part of her, and chose to keep living anyway. Because that's what Jack McCrae had taught her. That standing when others run wasn't about fearlessness, it was about refusing to let fear win. That protecting the weak didn't require being strong, just being present. That a man's worth, or a woman's, wasn't measured in years, but in impact. And Jack's impact lived on in Sarah's courage, in Nina's resilience, in Daniel's future, in Cole's redemption, in the 156 victims freed by evidence he'd died protecting. The measure of a man, indeed. 5 years later, Sarah McCrae stood in the U.S. Marshal's office in Denver, raising her right hand, taking the oath her father had taken 35 years earlier. 20 years old, top of her class at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center, specializing in human trafficking cases because that's what had taken her father, and she'd be damned if it took anyone else's. Nina sat in the audience, Daniel beside her at 6 years old, quiet and attentive in ways that reminded everyone of his namesake. Uncle Robert and his family occupied the next row, pride evident despite their early doubts. And in the back, allowed special dispensation for the ceremony, Cole Mason watched via video link from ADX Florence, tears streaming down his face as his sister became what their father had been, a protector, a warrior, someone who stood when others ran. After the ceremony, Sarah placed her marshal's badge on her father's grave, just for a moment, letting him know the legacy continued. Then she picked it up, pinned it to her chest, and went to work making the world safer the way Jack McCrae had taught her. Standing when others run, protecting the weak, measuring worth not in years, but in impact. The fight continued, the stand never ended, and Jack McCrae's final lesson lived on in everyone he'd touched. Some stories don't have endings, they just have people who refuse to let them die.